Hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of the GM Post-Mortem. I am one half of your hosting team, Colin, here with half-arsed hermit Lydia. Lydia, what's going on?
And I'm the other half. It's literally in the name.
Mm.
Together we're two. We're one whole ass. Nope,
We're
I'm not
one.
going to
We
follow.
make one whole
One
ass,
whole ass hermit.
one whole
No,
ass
no,
hermit.
this was bad. Can we redo?
Can we start over? Let's go back to the theme
Yeah.
song here. Let me...
No. Hello everyone. Oh, welcome to another episode of the GM Post-Mortem, and today with a very exciting situation. I'm not going to call just Trooper the guest itself. It's a situation when you have Trooper on
mm.
any show whatsoever. I've seen
It's
it
a whole
happen.
to-do.
It's a whole myriad of topics that will inevitably happen. I've seen it happen on his own stream where um it's supposed to be a video game. It's really a whole lecture in various topics that are always insightful,
We're watching
always
Trooper.
enlightening.
We're watching Trooper in the Zoom call right now. Just be like, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. In
Totally owning
case
it.
in case why you wonder why we don't have a guest on right away, so we can shower them with compliments and call outs, sometimes the same thing in one sentence,
Often.
before they're even on it, and there's nothing they can do about it. But
I
yeah,
love a captive
I've
audience, don't you?
I've been so excited about this the whole month because I absolutely adore his streams, absolutely adore his insights, and to have him work with Encounter Roleplay a little bit more, to have his streams on, to have the chance to talk to him in person today, I am so giddy for it. This could take hours, by the way. I hope everyone is ready for this. There is no cut-off end. We're just gonna let him run.
By the way, you said that it's a whole to do. It can cover a myriad of topics, but why don't you tell us what are we nominally discussing tonight? What is the supposed topic for the evening?
Supposedly we're talking about GMing historical settings because we all have a little bit of experience with that, and it is a different beast of sorts.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't want to wait
Can
any
I
longer.
can I just confess something to you really quick though?
Oh,
And one of the reasons
please
I
do.
find this will be good for me. What you just said is a lie. I have no experience GMing in historical settings. I've never done that before.
So the Second World War is not a
Oh shit!
historical.
What am I talking? Well, okay, yeah, but not. Okay, yes. I thought we meant like in a realistic manner. I guess that's all part of the conversation we're about to have. I mean,
Yes.
mine
Get.
I had Cthulhu mythos. Yeah, what? Okay, right. So, anyhow, without further ado, we are pleased. The GM Post-Mortem and this channel is pleased to present Academic Foxhole Trooper. Hey, buddy.
Yay. There's a trooper.
Hi, everyone. I just unmuted myself. I was also just typing notes because that's what I do. I was like, oh, let me just take some notes because I know I will forget all of the things. Hi, everybody in chat. I hope you're all doing well over there in chat. I hope you have water and I hope you've stretched your legs because we might be here for, a
I
time
have
period.
water and Sour Patch Kids, so I'm ready to
I've
go.
got, yeah, right. I've got water and also Dr. Pepper. So, hello,
Righteous.
everyone. Oh, I just Cold Drake reminded me of something I wanted to say too, as well. That point that I had. I'm TrooperSJP, and I am a streamer. I stream video games, which means video games are on at times.
They are part of the production.
Like they're visible sometimes, and I also GM and play on RPGs all over the place, and I am here to be with this very cool crew to talk about GMing historical settings. And I want to say one thing for the record. This is important. I have just not online GM'd things that are not historical. I realize if you look at everything that I've GM'd online so far, they're all in historical settings, but I swear I have GM'd non-historical things.
There was a time.
There was a time. It just hasn't been online yet, but I've done it. I have done it. So just so you know.
We choose to believe you.
You seem trustworthy. That is noted for the record.
So
The
I
transcript
GM
will
Traveler.
reflect this.
I did Traveler. So yeah.
Oh, Traveler. I just looked at that in the store the other day. That's a sci-fi one, right? Traveler. Yeah. Okay, yeah. All right. Not historical, as far as I know. Okay.
Although technically it's not, but I GM'd Traveler Interstellar Wars, which is set in the past of the timeline of that particular
This is actually
setting.
just what I was about to make the Star Wars objection that like, well, it did happen a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So Star Wars is historical.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
sure.
So difficult. Draku's like, lies. No, I totally did. I have run on historical things. I swear. There's just no proof.
Well, we
so
are gonna go ahead.
on the risk of this in itself being already the first long exposition, what are the historical games that you have GM'd recently? Obviously, the Regiment is the most recent one
That I've played in, and that was
you've
GM'd
played
by the
in with
amazing
Prax, of course.
the amazing Prax, one of my history buddies, history nerd buddies. I have so in terms of GMing, I have GM'd A Good Society, which is Regency. I have GM'd Cthulhu Confidential, which is 1930s Cthulhu Noir. Uh, my current ongoing sort of long running. We're starting season 3 pretty soon of City of Light and Shadow, which is World War II French Resistance. I've also GM Night Witches, which was World War II Russian.
That was bloody amazing. I
like
really enjoyed
femur.
that.
Oh, so fun! I love that one. Bomber pilots. I have GM'd 50s Cold War. I've GM'd oh gosh, Renaissance. I've done Renaissance Florence. I have done the 30 Years War. I've done Old West. I've done 1920s, of course, like a million times. I have done Victorian, sort of like in both Clockwork Dominion, Castle Falkenstein, a couple of different sort of Victorian era things. I've always wanted to do prehistoric, and I haven't actually done prehistoric yet, but I will certainly do that. I also want to do 1960s, like a kind of like a real mod sort of situation, which I haven't done that one yet. I have done ancient Rome. I have done, oh gosh, I've done a realistic medieval. I've done a sort of like a medieval, a realistic medieval. I have done some Cold War, like 1980s stuff I've done. Yeah, I am probably missing some. I've done a lot of historical.
And that's
And
why
that's
you're
why
here.
you're here.
Yeah.
We are going to dig into that. I do not think there are enough hours in the day to cover all of in depth,
Oh, no.
all of those, but we are going to dig into it. Folks, if you're watching, our guest is Academic Foxhole Trooper. We are discussing GMing in historical settings, and if you have questions for Trooper, please post them in chat, highlight them so we will notice them easier, and we will take your questions down and relay them as we go along.
I would say, I think the first thing I want to say when it comes to GMing a historical game, it's the first thing I need to put out there, is that so there is conventional wisdom in the RPG market, and that is that and I'm sure these things are true, that the number one genre that people play is fantasy, right?
Yeah,
That's the
no
number
doubt
one
about it.
genre.
Yeah. No doubt about it. Yeah.
And if you want to make money or be successful, you must do fantasy. If you're not going to do fantasy, you can do sci-fi. That's all right. That's number 2. And then like number 3 is horror. And that's probably because of, World of Darkness, like dominating the 90s in its own way. But there are many genres out there. But as is often said, if you want no one to watch your show or buy your products, do historical, because nobody wants historical games. Like, people are not interested in it. No one's excited about historical games. So like there's an idea that historical games are not interesting. So that's a thing to note. And I would say that there's one thing I have noticed when it comes to thinking about GMing historical games, when I've talked to people about it, and you have to also deal with this with players as well, and that is that many people will say, well, I don't know history at all, so I can't run a historical game because, Like I don't know anything. Like how could I run a game?
Like
I don't know.
there's like the idea that there's homework involved, right? That you have to that
Yeah,
before you can do this, you must study
yeah,
and read a few treatises and stuff. And
yeah.
I grant you, when I GM'd, because as Lydia just remind my stupid brain, I did in fact GM a historical setting game. I didn't think of it because it was Cthulhu Mythos, but it absolutely was. And
Hmm.
I watched like a bunch of just World War II documentaries for weeks before I started GMing that game to get
Yeah.
more familiar with the time period. And are you saying that that sort of studying is not really necessary, or?
It may not be necessary depending on what you're doing.
Mm.
They're different. It depends. It depends. It may not be necessary. It may not be necessary. Sometimes it's not. And I know that that's one big fear that GMs are like, oh, I don't know anything. And then sometimes actually players will be like, well, I don't know anything, so how can I? Oh no, right? So sometimes there's this sort of anxiety about not knowing history, and so you can't play in a historical game. Yet
Mm.
people will be totally fine playing. We're gonna play a game set in the Empire of Grizzleaxe and like with some massive backlore, and the players don't know any. Like, I mean, I'll just tell you, like, Vampire has a lot of backlore,
Mm-hmm.
as does Shadowrun, as does Trap. Like, there are a lot of games that have huge amounts of lore, and people are pretty fine just jumping in with that, even though they don't know who the prince was 400 years ago, etc. And so I think that there's a particular anxiety that happens to history that doesn't happen with some of the other genres. Um,
And why do you think that
I
is?
think it
Lydia, we're going to say.
almost it almost reminds me a little bit of the suspension of disbelief question.
Mm-hmm,
Like, why
mm-hmm,
is this kind of magic hard to believe
yeah,
when there's dragons there?
Right.
Why? I mean, from
yep,
the various isms that we face with various mediums out there. So uh, you have magic existing, but women in power.
yeah,
That those
yep,
classic
Right. Or
questions
all
that we
that
all
weird,
know.
all that really weird discourse that happened over
Yeah.
the wheelchair that was in
yeah,
Oh,
the D&D
Ian,
wheelchair.
fucking
yeah.
remind me.
That's not
Yeah.
realistic. It's like a battle wheelchairs. Yeah, but again, the retort always is, yeah, but dragons are fine. Like I don't
Yeah.
understand what the yeah.
So I think that is easier to create that suspension of disbelief,
Hmm.
or if I get it wrong, it's not.
Yes.
If I don't
Yeah.
exactly have the
Yeah.
GPT of whatever it is in English, of a sci-fi nation correct, then who
Yeah.
cares because it's sci-fi.
Yeah.
Whereas when you have the historical setting, people presuppose that
Hmm.
there is a way to do it wrong.
Right.
There is a way to do it right
Right.
because, well, it's written down in its history.
But of course, if you've ever watched a VTM stream or a Shadowrun stream or any number of these streams, you get it wrong, people will tell you in chat. They'll
Oh
tell you.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's not like people won't notice if you get that one thing wrong and actually no, that's not exactly how that works. Actually, as it turns out, this is how magic, like, people will tell you. So like
Yeah.
if you're worried about people getting mad about you getting it wrong, that will always be the case. But hopefully your players are on your side. Generally speaking, players are on your side and they will be
But
with you.
I was
I think
amazed.
the mental barrier is a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
less when
Mm.
it's decidedly fantasy or sci-fi. Sorry,
Yeah.
Colin.
I was just amazed when I was doing Octon Cthulhu because there was I read everything and I read the lore and everything, but I know that I was pulling stuff out of my ass on occasions and
Mhm.
was not necessarily being true to what Modiphius wrote in their module. And there were times when I was like, God, I hope they're not watching right now because I am killing their lore. But I tried because I would read it, but I couldn't keep all that straight in my head, so I would make stuff up, sometimes. But yeah, that I felt that pressure there. That was a different set of circumstances because I knew, there's a sponsor that's watching the show and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But there is, I wonder if with history, I think maybe there's part of that. Okay, you screw up the lore of Vampire the Masquerade. Yes, you'll probably get called out in chat by some fan or something. I wonder if with history, one of the reasons why the anxiety might be more present and maybe be more acute is people don't want to screw up history in a way that causes offense. I can see that being something where if they feel as if they misrepresent history, that they may cause offense to a viewer, that they may be distorting reality in a way that makes them uncomfortable. I mean, do you think there's some validity to that?
Sure, maybe. It might be an excuse, but I'll say two things. One, it would be nice if they were worried about offending people in their other genres too. That would be nice. It's funny, the idea that that history is this precious that we're worried about offending people with history, but like you're not worried about offending people in that other game that you're doing. Maybe you should. And I also think about the ways in which. So I'm going to get to your actual question, but I was thinking about a conversation I had years ago when I was playing Dragon Age Inquisition, which also took forever, about settings that are basically not historical, but they totally are. And they were speaking specifically about Seventh Sea.
I was
Right.
just, oh man.
I was thinking that. I'm like,
As you were saying
sorry.
that, oh,
Yeah.
I just bought 7C
Yeah.
3 days ago, and I've been reading that book nonstop.
We've been looking over the map together, just
Yep.
laughing
Because
because
it's just Europe. It's
No, it's not Europe. It's Europa.
it's Thea.
It's
It's
Thea.
Thea.
Yeah.
But my
Right.
favorite, the one we were laughing at the most, is that there's the 3 islands off the coast that are Avalon, Inismore, and the Highland Marches. Inismore, the island home of the Einish.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
just Ireland. Like, it's Ireland. It's just
I mean,
Ireland.
And
Their symbol is a harp.
right. Like it's the Vatican Church. You know,
The
like,
Vatican.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I
headquartered
know,
in
come on.
Vatican City.
Right, yeah.
It's in Vatican City. Like, it's
Yeah.
It's
As if
barely-
just doing that means you don't have to worry about offending anybody, right? Because you just change the name, so it's totally
you
fine.
you switched a letter around. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that they just left Kirkwall, which is an actual city up in the Orkneys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
every other bloody country gets their own made up capital city. We get Kirkwall, and that actually exists. But it feels like, hey, they used it in Dragon Age 2, so it's now a fantasy
It's
city.
not fantasy.
I don't make the rules.
Yeah. So I think there's that one thing that and I'm going to get back to this about doing history correctly. That's actually a question I have to get back to. Don't let me forget that thought because it's important.
Taking
But
note.
one of the other things I think people notice is that people will say, "Oh, well, I don't want to do a historical setting because historical settings they're boring, right? That's when they're boring because they don't have magic or elves, right? So there's sometimes people have an idea that history can't be interesting because there's nothing supernatural about it.
To which I say, cowards absolutely can be.
Right. I mean, you can put magic
Yeah.
in your historical settings if you want to. But I also think something that's really interesting about historical settings is that that don't have magic in them, which I've done actually a lot of that, to be honest, is that oh gosh. All right. So some people say when I'm playing an RPG, I want to like escape into a realm of fantasy. It's like my wish fulfillment. It's like my escapism. But history is also an escape, right? Like history is also escapism because we don't live in history. So like it's just that there are different kinds of things that people want to escape to, right? Like people sort of assume that escapism is like a power fantasy or everything is great, but I don't know. There are a lot of grimdark things that people slide into as well.
And enjoy doing it.
And enjoy doing it. And so I think, of course, you always have to talk to your players about what they like. That's the number one. But if your players are up for a historical game, I think to be all right. So I am a historian by trade. I'm a music historian, which some historians would say is not real history, but that's because they're old. And
they're not here right now. So
and they're not here right now.
And if they were, we would fight them.
But I'm also very postmodern in my own way. And one of the things is that history. So there was a musicologist who was actually kind of weird, but famous, but strange, whatever. He wrote a very famous article that caused all sorts of trouble. And the article's title was something like "History is a Foreign Country." And his point, he was talking about the early music movement where people want to go and play medieval and Renaissance music exactly how it was played in the medieval times and in the Renaissance. And they spent all of this time like getting the instrument exactly how it was in the 1300s, and they're going to play it exactly how it was. And they get these huge arguments that almost come to fistfights about how are you supposed to play this thing in a way that is completely historically accurate. And what his article said, and this is going to be relevant, right, to this topic, is that we actually don't know the past. The past is a foreign country. It is not something we might think we know it, but we don't know it. And further, he went, we can never really know it. It is. We can never be historically accurate is basically his point, right? That for many, many different reasons. One, we're just never going to know what it sounded like. That's just actually not possible. Like we can, even if they have sheet music, we don't know. And I will also say, we don't want to hear it the way it was written. First, if we can't, like we can never hear it the way it was in the past because we've listened to Metallica. Like, I mean, we do not have the ears of a person from the 1300s. So we cannot hear music from the 1300s as they would have heard it because we have just had all this stuff that happened.
So yeah, when you say as we would have heard it, like, because of the different context, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It will not strike you the same way. It will not
ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, for example, like, and it's the same thing with like Shakespeare or classical music. People think of Shakespeare as like this high art that's like museum music, but it was like trashy. And like a lot of that music that we think of as being like, oh, I'm so fancy, was just like loud and distressing. But we can't hear it that way because our ears are different. I mean, you can try to be empathetic, which is a skill I'll talk about, but also we often actually don't want that. We say we want historical accuracy, but we don't really, because styles were different, right? Like the styles were actually quite different. And basically almost every kind of historical thing we do is actually about the current day, right? So anything we do that's historical is really about now. No matter how much research you do or don't do, what you really do is you're talking about the present moment in some way, and everything you do is being filtered through present moment aesthetics. And I always think it's really valuable to try to put yourself in a mindset of the past, because I think it's very instructive to sort of deconstruct your own mindset. But I think it's important to recognize that all history is always filtered through the current moment. And that I think becomes important. And I think the other thing also to think about when it comes to the history is when I was in middle school and we were learning about like ancient history, like in middle school, like in like the ancient world, and we were learning ancient Rome. And I remember asking my teacher, and I was like, what, 12 or whatever. And I said, what did working class people do in ancient Rome? Because we're talking a lot about various Caesars and generals and whatnot, but I'm just sort of interested, in what working class people did. And she said to me, oh yeah, we just don't know because working class people didn't write down things. And I was like, so all the history that I got, right, was a history of really rich people. And I found that very unsatisfying. And it is, first off, you actually can find some of these histories. I'll just point that out.
Right.
But also, this is to point out that a lot of history is not written. Right. There are many histories that have not been written that did exist. Like, we know poor people existed. They did.
Oh yeah, in droves.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Women existed in the past. I know you might not know that from various discourses.
Get the hell out of here.
But they did. And so there are all these sorts of histories that have not been written down that we can access through our imagination. Right. So when we're thinking about doing history right, I think it's important for me to think about sometimes the way to do history right is by breaking with the history books that you have, because those history books are written by certain people in certain times and they ignore certain people. And so sometimes to be the most true to history, you have to move away from what you have been taught.
I have that a lot when I'm touring because in my, old life, I was once a tour guide.
I used to be somebody.
Travel.
I was a big-time tour guide in Edinburgh.
Now I'm just a bum.
You got some hooch.
Dice. The throwback, thanks.
Yeah, homeless Lydia is now a thing. There you go.
It's something I often hear from people, especially stuffy English people. I'm sorry, but it's true. Because my way of touring, my way of doing history is storytelling, and Scotland in particular does that quite well. The approach to historical things here is much more entertainment based. Whereas growing up in Austria, if it's entertaining, it can't be history.
Right.
History has to be boring. Every form of academia has to be boring. You have to suffer through it or it's worth nothing.
That's vegetables, right?
Oh,
it's your
God,
vegetables.
Eat your vegetables interpretation of history. Yeah.
Pretty much that. So being a tour guide first in Melk Abbey, Catholic Abbey, and already being a little bit different than my other colleagues, and then moving to Scotland where that is actually embraced and appreciated, was incredibly eye-opening and nice. But I still every now and then get from people, the way you tell history is so very different. It's actually, I actually remember things like, because you are actually showing an interest because it is interesting. But then going further into what you just said, basically that it is impossible to look at history objectively because literally we are people, we are subjective. There is no way around it.
We're not objects, right? Like, we're not objects, so there is no objectivity. And you can do your best, but
Right. And so were the people that wrote down history. They wrote it down through their own lens. With Scotland in particular, the good example I always give is Tacitus.
Mm.
because Tacitus was the son-in-law of Julius Agricola, who led the whole charge against the Caledonians. But that means A, you have to appease daddy-in-law. B, the Romans lost, so you of course want to make
That's
the
always tricky.
Caledonians big and scary, because if you lose against wimps, then you are even more of a wimp. So naturally you have these bloodthirsty barbarians suddenly. That is already coloring history in such a subjective way that
Yep.
it is ridiculous to take this at face value. Naturally, at the same time, it is the invaders that give us the view upon the natives.
Yeah.
That also means it cannot be in any way, shape, or form objective. Caledonians themselves, or the Picts at least, didn't write much down to begin with. There are so many very obvious factors that deny any form of objectivity, yet people still, for some reason, think it is just because it's words on paper.
Right. Yep.
And that naturally applies to so many other settings and so many other forms of history. So to bring this back a little to RPGs, if anyone is worried about offending the words written on paper, maybe rethink priorities in this regard, because the words won't be mad at you, and people who are mad at you because you offend the words, well, maybe they're not the ones you should try to appease. We've had similar discussions with Spyhunter's Flames of Freedom, of course, which I was playing in, and Anna in chat was GMing last season. I encounter the amount of people angry over having people included that they don't know from their history, but actually existed when it comes to trans and two-spirit folks, when it comes to various First Nations, when it comes to women in the revolution. It was well researched. Those people actually existed, but for some reason we're still offending you by giving you what's real because it's not working with your personal worldview. Who's the subjective one right now?
Right. So can I bring up something? This is really important to me.
You can bring up anything. To
So,
be honest with you,
this is really, really important to me. This is a thing I will say, and I tell my students, because I give them writing assignments, and sometimes they're like, oh, I have to write a thing, blah blah blah. And I was like, you have to know that anything you write down is an act of politics, and actually anything you say is an act of politics, and everything you do is an act of politics. Everything is political, whether you like it or not. Even not participating is an act of politics, and so. And now some people are like, I just want to play a game. Yeah. Because I had a conversation about D&D, and there's somebody who's like, I just want to play my game and not have to think about things. And I was like, yeah, oh, well, so anyway, that you don't have to think about these things says a lot, but that's also politics. But every RPG that you GM is an act of politics as well, right? What game system you choose, who you invite as your players, who is the GM, how you run it, what system you run it, everything is politics. And I think of GMing in many ways it can be a form of activism. And at this moment, right, in history, there's a lot of discussion about this amongst medievalists, and I think also some classicists, about the ways in which a lot of white supremacists have co-opted medieval and also Norse history. They've co-opted a bunch of histories, and because a lot of progressive people don't seem to care about the past, they care about the future a bit more sometimes, that has been sort of left. And so there are all these things about the past that are just not true. They're just lies. Like, I mean, there are many true things, but there are some things that are not true. And the past has been rewritten. And that is an act of politics. And so for me, doing a historical game is a profound act of politics. I mean, if I wanted to, I could just do like sci-fi games where it's all set in the future, everything is great in the future. But if all I do, or if all of my diversity and thoughtfulness is always projected into the future, and I leave the past to neo-Nazis, that's no good, right? Like you can see this with, was it Battlefront 5, Battlefield 5? One of those video games where there was a woman on the cover, it was like World War II, there was a woman on the cover, she had a gun and she had a prosthetic. and people are like, oh, that's so terrible because that's historically inaccurate because women didn't fight in the wars and you didn't have like prosthetics. And they're like, well, first off, this prosthetic was based on an actual thing and women did fight in the war. Maybe not Americans, but they did.
Is
So
this World War II?
yeah, it was World War II.
Oh yeah, look no further than the Soviet Union. There were so many women
Yeah.
on the front lines in the Soviet Union.
But like everywhere, right? So
Yeah, I just know
and I was
particularly. Yeah.
yeah, and I was just thinking that for me, there is something very powerful about reclaiming the past that is a powerful form of activism. And when I say reclaiming the past, I don't mean writing people who weren't there, because I mean letting you know that they were there, right? I mean,
right.
Women have always fought. There have been people that we would call queer people always. They might not have called themselves queer people. And it's always really interesting to think about what they would have called themselves and how they would have understand themselves and how that changes how we understand ourselves now. That's always really, I think there's really great things that you can do, not only to sort of push back against narratives that are being done by bad actors. So there's something really powerful that you can do, but also you can learn more about yourself in your own time by looking at the past.
And that sounds really fascinating from a roleplay perspective too. I mean, trying to put yourself in the mindset or put yourself in the shoes of somebody who, as you just said, may not have had a vocabulary, I suppose, for their
no, they had a vocabulary. It was just different.
A different vocabulary. Yeah,
different vocabulary.
That, I guess what I mean, one that wouldn't match our modern one. Yeah.
And one thing, and this is one thing I want to say, this is a danger, and there's like a kind of an interesting discourse that I want to hit on as a historian. And it is this idea that, well, if you're going to do a history, you've got to change things because, people in the past, they had these really terrible thoughts. They were just so sexist in the past and they were so racist in the past. And, they were so classist in the past. And so they all had really bad attitudes in the past, unlike today, apparently. And so there's this way in which we like to project a lot of really negative attitudes into the past that are often historically inaccurate. Could
you give a particular example? Oh, you might be about to, and I just cut you off. But sorry.
Yeah. There was a really great article that I read about critiquing Game of Thrones and all of the sexual assault that happened in Game of Thrones. And people would say, oh yeah, but back in the past, that's what it was like. And this medievalist, she was like, okay, so first off, do you know how often women are raped today? A lot, right? And also that's actually not necessarily how it would have been in the past. Like this is a reading of the past that is not necessarily accurate. And what it does, however, is it lets you indulge in like really outrageous behavior and give yourself the fig leaf of the past. But that's not necessarily actually even the case, because manners were actually quite different, right? And I think another example, this one that gets me all the time, this is one that actually really bugs me, and that is like we'll talk about slavery, and somebody would, and like you might say something critical about slavery, and people will say, oh well, I mean, you can't really critique people in the past. That's not really fair, because everybody was fine with slavery, 200 years ago. And I was like, sure. Well, I can think of a population that wasn't okay with slavery. I can think of a really big one right now, as a matter of fact.
Hell of a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. But of course, in their mind, Black people, if we're talking about the United States, other groups depending on other countries, don't count as people.
Yeah, that's very exposing. Just that.
Yeah. Right. It's very exposing. And also, of course, there were abolitionists. There
Lots
were
of them.
a number of people who were like, this is not okay. And so when you say that everybody was fine with sexual harassment in the 50s, everybody was fine with X, Y, and Z, first off, it's just not true. It's just not true. But also, that is a fantasy. It's like when people want to play chaotic evil and just stab people all the time with no consequences. And I think it's actually really important to push back against those attitudes. And there's a way in which this also works from a progressive space, where people like to imagine that we now are so much more progressive than they then.
I was just about to ask that. Yeah. If I was, well, my question, I'm sorry, I'm just curious how to phrase, like, do you think that casting a dark pall on the past is a kind of cold comfort to people to be like, and look how much better we are now. Therefore, if we show the past as being so hyper negative and so awful in so many ways, aren't we so fucking great now? And it makes them feel better about themselves.
Right. But what you do when you do that is you erase people and you dehumanize people in the past.
Right.
And for me, how I run a historical game, how do I make a historical game interesting? There are a lot of things that you can do, and we can talk about many of them. But for me, it all comes down to this: people in the past were people, and they had feelings, right? They loved people, they hated people, they wanted things, they needed things, they got tired. That the past is full of human beings. And for me, any kind of game I run, but especially a historical game, is about practicing um, a thing that's actually part of my scholarship, which I'm still working on the name because I have like more than one name and it's tricky. The name that I want to call it, I feel like I shouldn't call it, but it's the name that I shouldn't call it is historical empathy. But I shouldn't call it historical empathy. I should call it contextual empathy because that's broader. Anyway, it's the idea of trying to be empathetic and taking seriously um, the past, like one sort of thinking of the past as an actual space, right, where people existed and thought and had feelings, and then also taking those things seriously. So, for example, if somebody says, "Oh, well, nobody was bothered by sexual harassment," I was like, "Really? Why don't you imagine yourself
Mm.
in the 1950s? Imagine yourself a woman in the 1950s who cannot have her own bank account, who cannot be on jury duty, who can be fired if she's pregnant, who actually getting a job is a little bit tricky, for whom many schools, universities still won't accept you because they've not gone co-ed yet. This, and this. And now imagine you got a job, which is pretty awesome. So you're getting some kind of autonomy. And the person who's at your job is sexually harassing you. There are no sexual harassment laws, right? They do
Right.
not exist yet.
Pre-Title VII, yeah.
Right. Yep. So this is happening. So you can't do anything about it necessarily besides just leave. Um, so maybe you don't say anything about it, but that doesn't mean you're fine with it, right? Like just come on, like think of yourself as a human being, and then think about how that might be interesting. Like what, and then what, but also when people are uh, in oppressed spaces, people have coping mechanisms and they have tools to survive in their situation. And we may not know those tools today, um, although some people actually do, because that was only 20 years ago, a couple of years ago, right? A couple of decades. But there are tools that people learn to survive, and those tools are beautiful and amazing. And a historical game can also give you that. The historical game can give you the ways in which communities came together, made spaces in the face of things, and were able to thrive, right? So there's amazing work you can do in a historical game that is all rooted in people, and your PCs are going to be people, right? So your players at the table are people. So there's amazing work that's not necessarily about a king or a queen or whomever, but about the people at the table, just like there were people at tables in the past that you can sort of access
Can I ask you
and
a question on that
do
though?
cool things. Yeah.
Um, I find that really interesting what you just said. The notion of, yeah, people had coping mechanisms, ways that they got through it. I mean, same point you made before with regards to slavery. We can think
Yep.
of a very large population of people who
Yep.
were not okay with sexual harassment, about half the population,
Yep.
and that's
At
fascinating to
least.
me hearing the way you say that though. Like that, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm selling some some math people short there, but the the idea of having coping mechanisms and having ways that you survive these things and get through, and how that is a very interesting thing to explore. However, I'm just curious what you think about that with regards to what you said before about how it may not be necessary to do lots of research and stuff to do a historical
Mm-hmm.
setting. Are you saying that those are things that we can arrive at by simply um, putting ourselves in the shoes of somebody there and just using empathy and trying to think through what those mechanisms were? Or is it of value to actually do research and hear from people and how they got through these things?
Um, I can give you two answers. It depends on your proclivities. Um, it depends on your proclivities. I think you can actually do it. So to go one step further, I will say if you're going to GM a historical setting, there are two different types of campaigns to think about, or games to think about. One, a game that gives you the history in the book,
Mm.
and one that doesn't. Um, a game like Night Witches or Stille Nacht or Harlem Bound, many of these games give you the history you need in a gameable format, right? They're like, here are the things that somebody's done that research for you. So if you run a game like that, all you need is just the you just need that book, right? You don't have to do any more if you don't want to, because that book will give you everything you need. So if you're super nervous, there are a lot of gaming books written by people who've done that research. And
Flames of Freedom is probably another example of that, right?
Oh yeah,
everything's in there. Yeah,
everything's in there. There are a bunch of things that they give you what you need to run it, so you can feel good, right? You don't have to worry about it too much. If you're going to run a historical game set in with a generic system that doesn't give you that info, or there's no supplement, then you're going to have to do that research yourself, which we can talk about doing historical research for gaming purposes a little bit later. But so you don't have to. Like, if you're daunted as a GM, you don't have to, especially if it's a short shot. Like, if it's like 1 to 6 episodes, you're fine. If you want to do extra historical research, you can. And luckily, we have the internet, and things are much easier than they were in the past to get a lot of information. And also, I think, and this is the thing I was going to get back to about this, I think it's important to think about what kind of research you're doing. And I am a fan of what is called microhistory, which is looking at the history of just everyday people. And sometimes you don't need a lot, right? Sometimes you don't need a lot of that, but just little things like I was watching some documentary weirdly about, I don't know, whatever it was, that talked about how before Vidal Sassoon, I think it was, before the 1960s, there weren't home hair dryers. And actually, a lot of the kinds of hair care products that we take for granted were not commercially available. And so there was a reason why women would go get their hair done every week, because a lot of the products they would need, if they had money, if they didn't, they just did other things, were just not available, right? So all of a sudden, that is this one little detail, like why people actually went to the barber every week or the hairdresser or hair salon every week. So that is this one little detail. It's not a big deal, but all of a sudden, that as a GM, that means you're like, oh, okay, hold on a second. That means I can have a scene. If I know that, I can mention it to my players, and then I can have a scene where they're at the hair salon, right? And if I can just build that into my campaign, and it's that one little detail that all of a sudden makes it feel very, very real, but it opens up all these really cool RP possibilities. And it was just one little weird detail that, like, a bunch of like home shampoos and things like that were just not available until fairly recently.
That's also fascinating, though. I love little tidbit facts like that that you may never have known, but that actually contextualize things you do know all of a sudden. Because now I realize, like, I've seen that scene in tons of media of a whole bunch of women with the curlers in and the hair dryers at a salon in like 1950s, 1940s settings, and there was a reason why there were so many of those scenes. There actually is a concrete fact that ties to it that contextualizes that whole thing, and that's actually fascinating. I never knew that.
And I find that microhistory is great because that's what you actually need for your RPG. Like, so when I think about history, there's like micro and macro. And as a GM, the micro is what you need the micro is what's going to be interfacing with your players. Like, your players are going to be interfacing with microhistory. Macro history is just plotting cheats, is what it is. Like, macro history lets you is a way for you to lessen your work as a GM in many ways. But the microhistory is what your players are going to, for the most part, be dealing with. They're going to be dealing with the fact that actually, if you wanted to get charcoal, you'd have to go to the Goodyear store, right? Or the fact that, gosh, I mean, all sorts of things, like, depending on where you're at, right? Oh, thinking about, like, for example, what the state of prosthetics were, or
I'm thinking of the number of things that you could buy in a drugstore in periods that you can't anymore. Like if you needed to go get cocaine at the drugstore, things you could do in years past, right?
Yeah, right. Or as Prax says, the reason why I have to wash my hair rejection for dates was more than just a cop out, right? That actually, and I think this again goes back to empathy. Like, think about this for a moment. The pill is from the 1960s.
Yeah, so 1950. There's a great book on that. 1959. That was the year that the pill became commercially available. In 1959, there was some historian I read.
Single women until a little bit later.
Yeah.
And so, like, think about, what does it mean? What does that mean? Well, that means that anal sex is more popular. Also, oral sex, right? That our sexual behavior is going to be a little bit different, right? Because people are still having sex, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've never slowed down. Yeah.
Right, but it's just be a little bit different. And what a relationship means. So this is like so I really love trashy things. Like you can watch documentaries, you can watch movies, et cetera, but there are these really amazing things that I really love if you want to get to microhistory, that can get you to different attitudes that are surprising, that would surprise you. And I have sort of become a little bit obsessed with, and I feel like I should run something. That's another historical. I get it. I know. 19 like late 50s, early 60s teen exploitation movies, right? So movies aimed at teens that they would watch in drive-ins, and these are mostly made for like $14.57, without really professional, like, it's very low budget,
And you
aimed
said
at teenagers.
teens were the target audience of this?
Yeah, teens were the target audience. So they were aimed at teens. And what's really interesting to me about these films is that it tells you something about the 1950s, 1960s that you're not going to get in other. And that's actually, No Brad is actually where it's one of these teen exploitation films. Date Bait is where that emote comes from, because in this one film, Date Bait, right, it seems very conservative. It's suburban and it's everything you imagine, right, I suppose 1950s to be. And there's this couple, Brad and Janie or whatever, and they're Brad's the antagonist, like Logan and like Jane or whatever, and they're like, the movie starts with them dancing at this diner that is clearly probably on a highway, probably somewhat outside of the suburb where all the teenagers go to dance the rock and roll. And so that's interesting already. You're like, oh, okay, that's a setting I can have a scene, right? I can have a scene in this place that's sort of set out from where the rest of society is, where they can do these things. So they're there, they're dancing together. They seem to be a couple. They've got another sort of couple that are friends of theirs. And then Brad shows up, and Brad drives in his car, and he shows up. And when he walks in, everybody's like, oh, like Brad's back. And it seems a little bit weird and a little bit menacing. Like, and there's this sense like, oh, he's back. And you're like, oh, well, where has he been? And he walks in, and he walks up to Logan, and he goes, oh, great, I've only been gone for a couple of months. You're like, where's he been? And already you steal my girl. And she turns
Brad.
Yeah. And she turns to him, and she's like, but you're wrong, Brad. I'm not your girl. Like, I just went on one date with you, and you think you own me, and you don't. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And one of the big problems, the tensions between her and her parents, is that she's only dating Logan. And they're like, you should be dating lots of boys. You shouldn't be just dating one boy. We think that's kind of inappropriate. And that is not our imagination of the 50s, because we imagine the 50s as being very conservative or whatever, and women have no agency, all this stuff. But if you think about it, if you're dating only one boy, that probably means you're very serious about that boy. And they did not necessarily think that was a great idea. They wanted her to play the field, right? Like date lots of boys, because that seems safer. And so that's really interesting, that all of a sudden you have this space where actually something that seems the things that we think as being that they would never have had in the past, actually maybe they did even more in certain ways. And you can just get these little moments where you can do these very cool things that culture is 50s, she should be dating lots of boys. Okay, she's no, but she wouldn't be have a terrible reputation, because the thing is, today we assume you're having sex with people if you're dating them, but that was not the case in the past. People dated without necessarily having sex with each other, right? So you could date lots of boys, and that would be fine, actually probably a bit more appropriate, because then you're not going steady with somebody, right? So, and I just think there's something really interesting about different ways of thinking about the past that humanizes it. And if you can get access to some of those things, either through just sometimes watching films, I recommend films from the time period if you can get them, rather than films about the time period, or documentaries. And those are usually fun. You can just get little things that are really neat that you can add into your stories.
And do you recommend, like you brought up these 50s teen exploitation films, like it seems like it's instructive to find, I guess, like, pardon the term, but like the low culture of the time, the more you find the trashy shit, right? Like, if you really want to get some genuine attitudes, I guess, of how people felt and what they consumed, then yeah.
Yes, and here's the thing about how, like, the past is boring, right? So do you want to know where Brad was? Why he was gone for those couple months?
No, Brad.
I am on the edge of my seat. Tell me, Trooper.
He was in rehab because of his heroin addiction.
Oh, shit.
Oh, yeah.
I was not expecting that.
Let the girl get some other dick while you do that.
Right. Well, no, they never even really dated. She went on one date with him, whatever, right? He's obsessive. That was a problem later in the film. But you may not know this if your only sort of access in the 1950s was like family sitcoms, is it? But there was a lot of heroin. in the 1950s. And you'll get that from like low culture, right? Like there were drugs in the 50s. People were, there were beatniks. Like, I mean, the 50s was a much wider, had a lot of different things in it than we often think. And so
Yeah,
all
it's not all
those
Leave It to
things are
Beaver. Yeah.
there. It's not all Leave It to Beaver. And actually also Leave It to Beaver is not even Leave It to Beaver, right? Like, I mean, people, I mean, I would hear people say, oh, why can't we go back to the 50s? I would never want to. You know, when women stayed at home, like in Leave It to Beaver. And I was like, oh, right. You mean the TV show where Barbara Billingsley, who's playing Mrs. Cleaver, is a working woman, right? She has a job and she's an actor. So that one.
What's that book? There's The Way We Never Were, I believe is the title of the book, about
That's right.
specifically
Yeah.
the nostalgia for the 1950s and the 1950s that did not fucking exist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Never did. So for me, I do like little things. There are little things when it comes to sort of if you're going to do research. What I did for Night Witches is I just got a book which is probably on my shelf over there, which was just interviews with women who were night witches, and so I just read their oral history. And that oral history was great because they would say these little things like, oh yeah, you know, we would take we would take our flares had parachutes. We would take the parachutes off and we'd sew them into underwear because the underwear they gave us were like men's underwear that was like way too big because like they gave us nothing good. So we would just sew our own underwear. And that means you're like, oh, I can have a scene, right, where our players are sewing their own underwear and then they get to talk. And you don't have to history dump your players either. You can just do every episode a little detail. And you yourself as a GM can just do research one little detail, right? For each session. You don't, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You can just get these little details and just add each time one little detail that is a way that allows you to grow the space in a way that's not overwhelming.
It's
Yeah.
a way to add flavor in a
Mhm.
natural fashion rather than trying to educate. It's still a game. You're still
Yep.
supposed to be a GM first, not a
Mhm.
teacher.
Mhm.
But if you do it right, it's similar to the entertainment thing I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. If you do it right, people will learn much more and much more important things
Yeah.
about the human psyche and
Yeah. And
the
I
yeah.
and I
Just
think of
distressing for me because I'm realizing I did it like all wrong. I feel
no, there's no
like in
wrong.
hindsight.
There's no wrong. There's no wrong way to do it. I mean, personally, I have opinions. Like I think that if what you're doing is harming people and like propagating
I don't think I did that.
badness, then I think that's my opinion. That's no good. But other than that, you know what I mean? Like you know, like just don't be gross. But if you do, like, but also I'm not the boss, but you can do whatever you want. But I don't think
I
there's a
have
wrong
no
way to do
intentions,
it.
and I hope I didn't do that. I don't
No,
think I did
no.
that.
But you know what I mean? Like you can do like you can do complete historical fabrications. I don't care. You do whatever you want, you know? There's no wrong way to do it. If you wanted to do history as it was seen in uh in films, you can do that. Like if you wanted to do like there's a great setting for GURPS Atomic Horror, and it's basically 1950s horror films. So that's the setting. And so it's not based on oh, I just lost Lydia. Oh, 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 oh. She'll come back. I hope. Just go to the two, your two starting ones. Oh, yeah. You know, that's why I actually always commission one, uh, an overlay that's one fewer in case somebody drops. So I can just quickly press that button and go there. It's the thing I do. Um, I'll sit up tall. Yes. Yeah. So I think when the, oh no, sure. We'll be right back.
Okay. We are back after, well, it's been many a time on a stream of one kind or another. I've had to say something shitty about an internet service provider, and today is yet another one of those days. Lydia, please tell the people in chat, if you would, who your ISP is so I can send them a strongly worded letter, and perhaps we can all join in this effort. But alas, Lydia's internet has died. Virgin! Well, fuck you, Virgin. Yep. Wow, fuck you, Virgin, it is an ironic sentence.
I imagine that it will come back soon, and then it will be. I'm just hoping that it will be good.
Yeah. Well, if it comes back, we will get Lydia right back in here. No issue. But for now, it is just myself and Trooper. So, Trooper, I'm sure you were in the middle of a really good point when that happened. But
can I put the link to my Discord?
Oh,
good,
please.
it was DM'd. It's fine. It's been. Speaking of which, let me host this channel right now. So I was just saying that I suppose one of the things I wanted to say is that I think if you're going to GM history, a historical setting, one, do you have a source book that's just going to give you all the information you need, and then you're good? Do you need to do your research yourself? I find oral histories are always good. I think timelines are really great. A good mix of macro and micro, but I think there's some things you tend to have to ask yourself as a GM.
Isn't it just a timeline of historical events? Yeah.
That's great. And Wikipedia will often give you them by month. And they're often like timelines by month, which is great because I'm just like, okay, gosh, I need to figure out an adventure idea. Oh, it turns out there's a bread riot in 3 days.
That's
great.
Yeah.
Like running historical games gives you is a lot of GM inspiration if you just look up timelines actually, or just random people. But a couple of things I think to think about as a GM is, one, if you're going to do a historical setting, presumably you're excited about that setting for a moment. So what is it about it that excites you? Lean into that. But I would say things to ponder are, and this is one that I was talking to somebody about this, and it was interesting. I said, well, how much, and I can give you my philosophy, but how much are you as a GM going to change history? I actually don't have a strong opinion about that actually as a GM. I think as a GM, do whatever you want to do. Like I could do a very historically accurate thing, or I could go alternate history. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care. Like, I'll do whatever. I'm happy. But I think the big question I think that one should probably ask is, how much can your players change history, right? Like, can your players kill Hitler? And I know that I was talking to somebody who's like, oh, well, it would be disrespectful to history if they could change history. And it's not my position.
I frankly don't understand that position. Like, history's, how can you disrespect history? Disrespecting the people who were there in some way, perhaps, but I don't know. History is not an entity. It's not offended.
Yes.
I don't understand that.
How far might be back? Woo! And like, maybe it's like disrespectful to the people's memories, right? There's that sort of a thing. But I don't see it that way. I mean, I think we're set up for you to come back whenever you want.
Oh yeah, I can hop in.
Like, we're ready.
I could probably do it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It will be awkward for a second, but then I think I can fix it. No problem.
And also, being able to change history is not like a binary with either yes or no.
All right, let's see. I think I can pull this trick off.
Can we do it? Can we do it?
It's all going to get weird for a second. Everybody bear with me. All right, so what I'm going to do now is switch, and then I just got to do that, and yoink. Oh, wait, we're in the wrong place, but...
Wait. Whoop.
You
Now we're
are
good.
Colin now, Trooper.
Oh,
Congratulations.
I need the hat.
I mean, yeah, I promised you the hat earlier, too. Yeah. All right, fixed. All better.
So like thinking about, so there's a book that I like. It's called Foregone Conclusions. It was very sort of Foregone Conclusions Against Apocalyptic History by Michael Bernstein. and he's a historian, and he wrote this very interesting, and again, think about this what you want. I'll just tell you what he said and why it was interesting to me and why that's useful for me as a GM. He said it was a critique of the way that we do history, the way we think about history. He said that we tend to have a habit of treating history as if it were a novel. Um, and that means that we tend to see history, if it's a novel, that means it has a beginning, middle, and end, which means it has
An act structure almost, right?
Right, it has an
Yeah.
act structure, but it also means that it has foreshadowing, right? So, and what ends up happening in history, and I'm just copying down the highlighted text right now in chat, is that historians, and not just historians, also just regular folks, tend to blame people in the past for not seeing what was coming. Right. And he was talking very specifically about World War II, but he says not only things like, well, why didn't the Jews and the Roma and et cetera, why didn't they see? Why didn't they leave earlier? Why didn't they know? And we, more recently in the US, like, why didn't you see it with Hurricane Katrina? And of course, because history is not a novel, right? Like, it isn't actually fixed. Like, you actually don't know what's going to happen. And also what he further argues is that multiple things could happen. It's not like history is a line and what happens now must lead to the next thing. There had been anti-Semitic demagogues that had been elected, mayor of Vienna at one point in time, different places, and then they didn't become dictators. Like, they might have wanted to, but it just didn't happen. There were like 44 attempts on Hitler's life. One of them could have been successful. It just so happened it didn't, but just because it didn't doesn't mean that it couldn't have. And so thinking about captions are frozen.
Yeah.
So thinking about history not as a fixed novel with a beginning, middle, and end with foreshadowing, but something that is open and maneuverable, for me is actually perfect for GMing a historical game. Because in a historical game, as a GM, you have no idea how it's going to go because players are going to do what they're going to do, right? And so there's a model of history, of thinking about history as being open, that really meshes with what an RPG is. And so for me, when I GM a historical campaign, I know that the players are going to impact history because you can't be anywhere without impacting it. And the question just becomes, how do you want to deal with changing history? Because history is going to change, right? It's always changing. It's fine. And how do you want to deal with it? And for me, I think there are a couple of different approaches, and it depends on what your players and you want. Maybe you want to play Inglourious Bastards, where you go and you assassinate Hitler and you end the war early, and it's like, woo,
that was my
I was-
original elevator pitch for Octon Cthulhu.
I was literally just thinking that when you said changing history, because that's one of the things, and you can think of Tarantino what you want, but the thing he does with films where he just goes and recreates the historical feel, at least the one that we're used to, again, because of subjectivity, I'm fully aware of that, but he does that really well in the first third of the film, and then just leads this whole premise ad absurdum in a very, very bombastic way, which I personally enjoy. I know he's plenty problematic and all these things, but who isn't? But I can see that work incredibly well for a TTRPG campaign, actually. We talked about Inglourious Bastards, Colin, when you started playing.
Yeah, that was the original pitch for Octon Cthulhu, was Inglourious Bastards pastiche type thing.
Yeah, and even with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that was kind of a similar vibe. And I can see that work really well for a sort of closed off game, when, of course, as you said, as long as you respect what everyone wants out of the campaign, but that can be such a power move in a way. And I'm personally never, we also talked about that at some point. I don't mind power fantasies. I think everyone deserves to feel good and powerful, and for everyone, power fantasy is something different to begin with anyway. Doesn't necessarily mean you are going to be, the hero of the world. Everyone has a different kind of power fantasy, but for a historical setting, changing history, can sometimes be incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
I'd love to kill
Taking
Hitler. I mean, that sounds
an
extremely empowering.
active part in
Yeah.
history can be incredibly empowering, almost especially when it comes to various heritages. We had that in Cthulhu. We had Kat playing Cleric of Chord, playing a character that it was partly based, loosely based on on a real historical person relative to someone else in chat. I don't know if you're all comfortable with me saying that, but that level that is real to some because it is part of their personal family history, part of their heritage's history. To play that in a game, to explore that in a game,
right,
can be such a valuable experience, I find.
Yeah,
Whether
and I
that.
think, and I just think it depends on like what kind of, and I also think I think you said this thing about power fantasies, there's nothing wrong with them, and I also think to sort of yes and that that some people's fantasies are not about power in that way, but like some people like low powered games, right? For example, here's a thing that right I had to find the right players because you have to find the right players. But for City of Light and Shadow, um, I did not want to run a high powered cinematic um, French Resistance game. I didn't want to run it like James Bond, where like you go and you like pow pow and the explosions, right? Um, I just kept thinking about all of those people that existed in real life who like they were grandmothers, you know what I mean, who were just like grandmothers, and they would sit and they would knit and they would like observe all the troop movements and knit Morse code into a scarf that they would then send off to their nephew in the UK and send all that info. And many of these people who were in the resistance were not soldiers. Um, there were some, there was one woman, Victoria. She had like she had a limp. She was disabled. There were people who like just all these amazing people who were just regular everyday people, just like you or me, who, in a time of fascism, stood up and decided to do something, right? To stand
And
up
by the
and
way,
do
the
something.
particular facet you just mentioned, Kat's character in Octon Cthulhu did that. She knit code into scarves that she did.
Oh, that's
It was
amazing.
one of my favorite details that Kat brought into that character. It was awesome.
And for me, it's not necessarily a power fantasy in the way that people might think about it, but for me, I believe there's something. When Superman flies into a burning building to save the orphans, right?
Which,
Like that's very
yeah.
impressive because Superman flies into a burning building and saves the orphans. Superman, however, is invulnerable. When a regular person who has no superpowers runs into a burning building and saves the orphans, for me, there's something especially powerful about that. And I wanted that to be the fantasy, right? Not that you can do these amazing things because you are so powerful and you have all of this, like all the like the magic and the cinematic and all of that stuff, which is great. And I also enjoy that too, because I've also run that kind of style. But I wanted people to play people who were regular people, but yet still saved art and saved people.
But still extraordinary. I mean,
But still
right.
extraordinary. Basically, it's like I'm very fascinated by the extraordinariness of the human,
Yeah.
and that's a different kind of fantasy of the extraordinariness, the heroism of the everyday, and that is not a kind of a campaign for everyone, but there are players who will love to be able to play some everyday person, right, who is going to step up and walk into that room knowing that they're in danger and then do this stuff, and that's a different kind of power fantasy, and that's something that you can do in really cool ways through historical campaigns that can make people, to go back to what Lydia said, to really connect to things that can be very meaningful to people and sometimes healing, or inspiring, and make people think, hey, people did this, I can do this, right? And then sometimes you also want to do Tarantino too, right? So like all of those, like the whole range is possible. And when it comes to changing history, I always remember that my players are the protagonists of the game. Any game that I'm running, I do have Colas on YouTube. Colas is on my YouTube channel, which is TrooperSJP, and both seasons are up there if you want to watch it. So for me, for Colas, because I'm going for a more like a real thing, but no matter what, the player's the protagonist, right? Like they're the stars of the game. So whatever happens is going to be what they do. But that doesn't. So for me, like, can my players kill Hitler? I mean, I suppose it's possible. I mean, like somebody could have killed Hitler in real life. I think it'd be very hard because they're in Paris and Hitler does not come back to Paris. But I mean, they might kill Goering. That's probably a bit more likely, killing Goering.
And satisfying also.
I take it.
Yeah, I'll take Goering.
Right? Yeah. Sure. But also, and this is actually also a little bit
Spear,
of
Goebbels. Oh, yeah.
Sure. Virginia Hall. Thank you, Cleric. But for me also, there is politics in this game. In terms of my political agenda, and that is, I think there is danger personally, right? Because again, I think you have to think about, what you're doing when you're doing any kind of a game. And for me, I believe that we have a habit of turning Nazis. I was told once by a person in chat who was not a regular member of chat, just stopped by, was like, "Oh, you can't do a game set in World War II. That's inappropriate. Like, you can't do that." And I was like,
"Oof, then I'm screwed." Oh.
And I was like, "Well, but I'm going to." And they're like, "Well, I suppose it'll be okay as long as you show that like Nazis are monsters and there's never any sympathy for them, that they're kind of like monsters." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that either."
Thank you.
Because I think that's irresponsible. And then this person was upset. And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "They were human beings. Like, they're not monsters." And Nazi Germany was not done exclusively by Adolf Hitler.
It was a group effort.
It was a group effort.
As an Austrian, I have strong opinions on that matter.
You know what I mean? Like, it was a group effort, but also, I was thinking about Hannah Arendt, right? The banality of evil. It wasn't just Hitler, right? It was also that person, that everyday person who saw somebody doing like, resistance graffiti and then just turned them in because they were breaking the law. You know what I mean? Who just reported on it. It sort of fits all up and down. And so there's something about, I think, recognizing that what you're doing in the game doesn't just have to be killing Hitler. It can also be like these very personal things, right? And for me, I love the personal in the RP, right? There are all these really personal moments. You could save some people, you know what I mean? Like, you can save people's lives. You can like that local person who's on the ground, who's like the local person in your village who's rounding up people, you could kill them maybe. Or maybe you don't kill people. Maybe you do other things. Like, there's so many things that you can do, and really, thinking about that way,
Yeah, I have a point on Nazis too, because I obviously went through this, but I think Lydia had one as well, so I wanted to get...
To be fair, this is more of a thing before I forget. Trooper, I need you to watch the Herr Karl, because you'll actually understand it.
Okay.
It's Helmut Qualtinger. It's an Austrian comedian, but from that time where, comedy is like punching you in the face and then leaving you crying on the floor. But he basically did a whole thing which was so formative, because Austria had a big problem, still does, but had a big problem with accepting its responsibility. We literally profited from being the first victim of Nazi Germany, when in reality it wasn't in any way, shape or form a victimization. It was welcoming home the lost son, and we only started in the 70s, 80s, really trying to change that. I say we, it was a couple of writers, it was a couple of artists who were shouted at, who were spat at, who were called traitors to the country, from Elfriede Jelinek to Thomas Berner to many of these wonderful writers. And Qualtinger was one of them. He was the fat monk in Name of the Rose.
Yes.
But he did a program called the Herr Karl, Mr. Karl, where he plays this absolute nobody, a random person in a Viennese block, who chats to his probably assistant, but basically chats to the audience. The assistant is the stand-in, as they're supposed to restock for the shop, and he just chats about his time during the occupation and during the war. And he's just this normal everyday guy, but during the conversation you can see this absolute horrifying visage of someone who profited from Jews being persecuted and thrown out, and who was happy to profit from it. But then as soon as the war shifted, of course, he would shift as well. He would start schmoozing up to Russian soldiers and always making sure that he was fine because, oh my God, it's such a terrible time out there.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely blood boiling in a really necessary way, because that comes back, and that's what reminded me of it, the whole make sure they're monsters. Fuck that.
Yeah.
They're not. They're
Yeah,
people, because people are capable of that at any point, and you cannot you
Right.
can see it in every single culture, and to deny that is to deny the possibility that it can and will happen again if you're not careful.
That's the point I wanted to make, and this is actually something when I GM'd Octon Cthulhu on Encounter Roleplay, obviously I knew I was a little nervous. I'll confess I was obviously nervous about it because I've never had to GM a story with Nazis before.
Yeah.
So I had to think hard about how I was going to do that, and I talked with Lydia for one. Lydia didn't just help me with pronunciation of words, though she did. And I talked with my friend Diane, Balrog 1911, who's German, to get
Balrog's
context.
great.
To get context on what is the proper way to portray Nazis? Like, how do I do this right? And the feedback I got, and I read other sources that brought me to this conclusion too, where I finally arrived at, and what I told my players in our session 0 up front, is that the Nazis are not going to be monsters. They're not going to be cardboard cutouts.
Yeah.
They're not going to be one-dimensional comic book villains. They're not going to be Indiana Jones Nazis, for example. They are going to be humans.
Yep.
And they have to be humans. Because if they're not human, then their crimes aren't human.
Right.
And their crimes are very human. And the other important aspect of this was that this was Nazis interacting with the Cthulhu mythos. There's elder gods. There's, I can't remember what the actual one at question was because I didn't hit on the supernatural themes quite as much as I probably should have. But there's Cthulhu mythos elder gods here. And Lindy's in chat, who was in that game. Hi, Lindy. Played my favorite sniper. And one of the things I told Lindy and Cleric, who's in there as well, was that the Nazis are not going to be monsters. They're not going to be cardboard cutouts. And also, though, the corollary to this is that while the Nazis are going to be interacting with those beings, with these supernatural beings, that will never be the reason why they do anything.
That's
ever.
Correct. Yeah.
They are not puppets. They are not having their strings pulled by a stronger force. Instead, my ethos for the whole thing was that elder gods and Cthulhu mythos beings are attracted to particularly strong sources of evil, and they found one. But it's not the reason why they're doing anything. And I'm open to criticism, but I'm personally proud of the way that I portrayed them, because they were not monsters. They were complicated. They were humans, but the evil still shone through very strongly, and that's what I wanted to do.
But also, I think it's important to note the complicity of a lot of people, right?
Oh yeah,
like you don't have to be like a goose-stepping Nazi to have been complicit in what happened,
right?
And I think a lot about that. I think about the scholars, right, who wrote eugenic texts,
right, who gave the intellectual cover.
I think about people who just did the paperwork. They didn't do anything. They just did the paperwork. The accountants. But you can't run if you don't have the accountancy done. You know what I mean? Like, and just like thinking about the ways in which all of those things. But then also, I also want to think about the difficulty of the situation that people are in, right? So like I'm thinking about after World War II is over, a lot of French women were assaulted for having collaborated with the Nazis, for having sex with them or whatever.
I've seen the women with their heads shaven being marched through the streets. Yeah, I've seen the picture.
Right. So, but I'm going to ask, what should they have done? Right. Occupied Paris, the rationing was so bad that people were getting like 1,000 calories a day, if you could get that. People were starving. Like it was not great to live in that moment. And so what are you going to do? And why is that one woman worse than like, a couple of industrialists who are like You know what I mean? Like, and so like just kind of like thinking about what position are you in, right? And then for the players, and again, it depends on the style of game you're doing. If you're doing like a really big Tarantino-esque thing, it's different. You don't have to ask those questions. But I want to ask those questions. Okay, so here's this person, she's a collaborator. Does she deserve to be shot? Right? Because she's poor and she has no food, and this is a way for her to get some food. Uh, so so what, right? And I think just like thinking about where you want to spend your energy and how you want to do it is useful. And I think it's interesting, like because as a player and a GM, I really love like digging into character work. That's one of the things I love the most. And so history often gives you a space to do some really interesting character work. Like, and I want to make sure that you get just like a good variety to sort of give nuance. And that again is just about thinking, right? Like you could be a fan of jazz and a real Nazi. You know what I mean? Like just because you like jazz doesn't mean you're not a Nazi.
If only the
You
litmus
can be
test was
nice
that
to-
simple.
Yeah, right.
You can be nice to puppies and still be an asshole. Yeah.
Hitler
Yeah,
did
right?
love those
Yeah.
German shepherds very much.
He did.
He was very
Um,
sweet to them by all accounts.
Yeah.
I think something you mentioned much earlier, again to take this back
Yeah.
to TTRPG. I'm trying. I think the micro settings and micro
Yeah.
history you mentioned there can be so much more eye opening than anything else. I remember because that's what remind me of the little moments of civil disobedience, because
Yeah.
that's what it is. You know,
Yes.
it's literally against the law. Just because
Yep.
it's law doesn't make it right, and we all
That's
know
correct.
that.
Mm-hmm.
But thanks, Prax.
Dude, this is an entire semester of law school that's entirely on that one question. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not even kidding.
yeah.
That's a massive.
You are welcome to. I mean, we can get Prax in, and you can just go off on that. But
God, Prax, take philosophy of law in your third year of law school. You'll love it. Just kidding. You'll
but
hate it.
but basically, yeah, you're doing the tangent thing as well. When I was home a couple of years back, a friend of mine's grandfather had died, and they'd gone through the attic, cleaning out old stuff. So they found a box from that time, 1930s, 1940s. They found the Arbeitserlass, so the permit to work, which of course you would only get if you were a certain percentage Aryan.
Yep.
They also found various letters that he had been given by his boss, that his boss had received from, well, let's just call them snitches, basically, from various people higher up, telling him that he should fire this grandfather, that he should fire this man because he is a suspected communist who is hanging out with undesirables and so on and so forth. And that was A, incredibly interesting, and B, even for me as an Austrian, incredibly flooring, because again, of how we have kind of cleaned up and pushed that history far, far back. My grandparents never talked about that, because you don't talk about the war, you don't talk about these things. And just having that, it opens up such an interesting line of questions about who this person was, about various of these little scenes that you mentioned earlier that are nothing big in the grand scheme of how the war will go, but that show and that showcase the human condition, and those are so much more important for
which is what
TTRPG.
we're doing on the table, right? That's what we're doing at the table. There was one of the people I write about is this band called the Comedian Harmonists, and they were a very, very popular band in the 1930s. And half the group were Jewish and half the group were not Jewish. They were popular in Germany, but also actually globally. They were very, very big. And, they actually stayed longer than a lot of people did. They stuck around until like 1935 before they were broken up. But various members, like the family members, were all leaving. And I'm reading this oral history. And this was a little moment in this oral history that I brought in, not in as a powerful way, but like in a smaller way in the game that I'm currently running. And it was this moment that when I read it, I almost cried. It was so powerful to me. And I thought about it and I was like, I have to bring that into a game sometime, right? And it was the sister of one of the singers was leaving Germany. And at that point in time, I mean, what they did, of course, was they made it so that if you were one of the undesirables, they froze your bank accounts, right? It was illegal for you to take anything of value outside of the country. So there's all these things that they make it sort of difficult for you. And so she was leaving, and she had on her like all of the jewelry, and like things like that of their family, so that when they left as refugees, they might have something. And so she's on the train, and she's describing being on this train leaving Germany, and they're on their way out. There are a bunch of people on this train car, and it's a little packed, and they're all a bit stressed out. And then the train stops, and they're waiting and waiting. And then this Nazi soldier comes onto the train, and he's going to start searching all their stuff. And he's going to have to go through everybody's bag and search their stuff and confiscate anything that they had that would be, inappropriate to have. And he walked into the train car, she says, and he says, "Open your bags." And everybody opens their bags, and she's freaking out because she's got all this stuff. And he walks to the middle of the train car, and he stands there in silence for like 20 minutes, and nobody knows what's happening. It's about 20 minutes he's there. And then after 20 minutes passes, he just says, "I want you to know that not all Germans are Nazis." And then he just walks out, not having searched any of their bags, and letting them all leave with something so they wouldn't be destitute when they got where they were going. And that was like such this really powerful human moment, that is not any kind of history that we learn. And I thought, this for me is what, for like the kind of game that I want to run in this instance, this is what that is about for me, right? It's about having these really amazing human moments that are a space where the players can have something powerful like that, and where their PCs can help create these powerful moments. And that is something that I that is really hard to do if you're not doing a historical setting, right? Because all of a sudden it has this meaning that is, like, and to know if you're like, oh, I'm playing a game in the Renaissance, and you meet, you hear about, I don't know, you're in a bar, and there's this fight that breaks out, and this woman in pants shows up and does a duel, and there's a whole thing, and you're in this stuff, and you're hanging out, and it turns out that she's Queen Christina of Sweden. You're like, oh my gosh, and she's a real person, right? That there's a ways in which you can know that people like you existed in the past, or you can see the humanity of people even in terrible spaces. And in a moment like this in 2020, um, being able to see the humanity of people is, something very valuable and powerful. And there's something about, and again, I love fantasy, which I've run. I love sci-fi, which I've also run. But there's something about doing a historical that it takes away a certain remove if you do it in the right way. And so all of a sudden, when you are able to evoke the humanity, the humane, it's not a fantasy that is not connected to us. It is real, right? Like, we can be humane like that because this did happen. We can stand up and, do things. And there's something about being able to tell a story that honors people who did exist, that inspires us now in our current life to act or to be humane. um, it's hard to say, oh, yeah, but that's like set on Mars, so it doesn't really apply. Well, actually, it's not set on Mars. You know what I mean? Like, it's set here and now. So
Mm.
there's something very powerful about that, which as a role playing experience, I have found always very pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
I really love. I mean, this seems all linked into the concept you were mentioning earlier of the name that you said you're going to probably toss out, but the idea of historical empathy and
Yeah.
the note. I mean, that's what I mean. This is exactly what I was thinking when you were discussing it earlier of the intense value that I can see in
Yeah.
placing yourself in the shoes of somebody in historical context, and if you know if they can get through it, if they can come through it with their soul intact, if
Yeah.
they can be humane, if they can if they can actually show some goodwill toward their fellow
Yeah.
humans at a time when it was much fucking harder to do so.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of hope in that.
Yeah.
There's something really valuable to pull from that, and if
Yeah.
they can do it, you can too. And
Yeah.
what better way to learn than by kind of placing yourself in their shoes and doing it that way? I think that's
So, a
beautiful.
lot of people get very, I see a lot of people on Twitter who are very demoralized,
Yeah, no doubt.
they're very demoralized. And I've always looked to my ancestors and people have survived much worse, much worse. And I've taken a lot of hope and inspiration and grit and toughness from that. Um, and so this brings it to another sort of historical topic, and it was about night witches. It came up in night witches, not with my group, but also actually this has come up a number of times. It's very interesting, and I've been happy to have been in groups where we ended up being similar, and that is there are people who are like, oh, we're going to do this historical game, and we're just going to cut out all the sexism or all this, we're not going to have sexism or racism in our game or any of that kind of stuff because we don't want that. And if you don't want that, that's cool. Don't have it. You know what I mean? Like, you do you. But first off, there's a difference between being sexist and thematizing sexism. Don't be sexist, but you can thematize sexism. And for the Night Witches, that those women were underestimated was part of the point, right? That there was structural sexism that meant that those women didn't get very good planes, et cetera, was important because it made their heroism and their overcoming more powerful. And it modeled a way to push back against systemic oppression. And it felt really good when they could punch that systemic oppression in the face. You know what I mean? And so if you don't want to have it there, don't. It's cool. Do whatever you want. But there's also value in having some not nice things being thematized in your game so that the players can model and practice standing up and saying something, doing something, pushing back, right? Like there's a way in which there's something can be very satisfying about and also and for me personally, sometimes I want to like I wouldn't want to play a black character in the 1950s and have their just race never be talked about because we don't want to talk about racism, so it's just not going to happen. Because I mean, I would want that if I don't trust the people at the table. Like if I don't trust the people I'm playing with, then let's just not talk about it because I don't trust you to not be gross. But if I'm at a table with people who I do trust, I would like to talk about it because it happened. And that's something that my family experienced. And I would like to be able to sort of think about that and like not always, right?
I'm curious
but sometimes that's valuable.
your thoughts on this, and I generally don't. I'm just in the example you gave with Night Witches. You said the fact that sexism exists in that world is part of why it's better, but of course they're standing up to it. You know, that's part of it. Could you, and I personally couldn't, I guess, but I'm just curious. In that the thing you're fighting, it's in the world. You know, it exists in the world. There's sexism, but it's the enemy. Is there any benefit you could see to ever inhabiting one of those negative things in a character?
Oh, I have.
Yeah.
I have.
Talk about that. Like, what do you see as the value in doing that? And tell me about that character. I'm curious.
Sure. Well, first off, as a GM, you're always going to do that, right?
Well, okay, yes, as the GM. Yeah, I mean, right. I did roleplay the Nazis,
player,
right? Yeah,
yeah, of course, right? But as a player, it was a sci-fi game. It was a near-future dystopian, and I played a bigot, a character who was conservative. So this was a Transhuman Space, which is a GURP setting, which is not cyberpunk, but transhumanism. So it's actually, much more about genetic engineering, and it's fairly pro body modification, and the questions are different, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that in the setting, the Catholic Church has a schism, and the sort of North American Catholic Church, which is called like conservative Catholicism, they don't believe that AI and bioroids have souls. It's part of their belief systems, like that you don't have a soul if you're artificially created, and it is therefore idolatry to treat people without souls as if they do have souls. So this character that I played did not believe that AIs had souls, and did not think that bioroids had souls, and did not think we should be making them there are a number of reasons. One, he had been a police, like a vice officer, and in this setting, people often use bioroids as sex in sex trafficking, and he was like, this is all bad, so like I don't like it. But first off, of course, the first thing I did was I asked my fellow players, is it okay if I play a character like this in this game with you all?
Right.
And they said yes, and we were all on board. And I said, okay, considering I'm going to be playing a character like this, I would ask that nobody here plays an uplifted animal, because that's going to be that's actually on the sheet as a disad, so I would ask not for that one. And everyone said fine. And I did it because I wanted to think about what it is like to inhabit that space. Like, who is that person? How do they get to be that person? Um, how did that happen? And can they be different, right? Is there a circumstance where maybe they could grow? And I had hoped, I did save those questions. Um, I hoped that my character would have grown actually through the course of the campaign. We played for 3 years, and I was like, I'm like rooting for this character who was like generally a decent human being, to get better on that topic. And I was a little disappointed that the character did not grow that way. I really wanted them to as a player. I was like really hoping for them. I was pulling through, but I had to be honest to the character. And some things happened in the campaign that like made some steps forward. Then some things happened and they stepped back. I've also been in a campaign where I'm in two historical campaigns actually, and this is I suppose a topic about um, dealing with some of these difficult topics, which I think is very interesting. So I was in two different campaigns, one not good, one very good. I'm currently in a World War II, 1947 Call of Cthulhu campaign, set in Seattle, and I'm playing a character who's Japanese American who has just come out of the internment camps, college student. So he's like a first year college student. He'd been in the internment camps the entire time. Now he's back out, and he's, Call of Cthulhu, 1947. One of the players was bigoted against Japanese people. And
Is this the good game or the bad game?
this is the good game.
Okay.
Because that character, I'm the only character that actually didn't fight in World War II. Everybody else was old enough that they had been drafted, right? And so, and that particular character had been on the Pacific Front and had been a prisoner of war and was bigoted against Japanese people and also my character. Nymeria asks, where does it stream? It's offline, I'm afraid. It's very good though. And what was really great is that the player who's playing that character, I have to say two things that are actually kind of important about this. The player is awesome. You know what I mean? Like, she's amazing. She's wonderful. She's very kind. She never made me as a player feel uncomfortable, right? Her character was bigoted towards my character. She is like a fan of me.
You maintain that separation.
We maintain that separation, but also she knows something that many people don't know, apparently. Sometimes people think to play a racist or a sexist person from the past, what you do is you say lots of racist and sexist things and you like really lean into it. But that's often not how bigotry works. People are often quite polite to you, to your face, right? Or they'll just say,
I lived in the South. I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, like you don't have to like put on a Klan hood, right? You you can do subtle things. And
the South will teach you the difference between politeness and kindness. Not the same thing. People are often very, very polite, but they are not kind underneath it.
Yes. And she did it she did it in a way that made sense, right? Like, people are going to be professional in certain ways. And what was really great was you actually got to play this process of the characters sort of coming to know each other, right? And then humanizing each other. And both of our characters had something to learn from each other in interesting ways, because my character basically just did not trust white people. Because he was in an internment camp, right? Like, at all. And then and there was a way in which, as we played through together, we were able to have this really amazing journey that was actually really, and then unfortunately this character died, which was quite traumatic to my character at the end, right? And never would have thought we have gotten there. And it was this really amazing way to sort of think about this moment. And that was really great.
Kat did a great job of that in my Act on Cthulhu game, where she played an American soldier, an American OSS operative, excuse me, not civilian, but who was an immigrant from Russia. She was from Russian Jews who left to get away from Stalin, essentially. And she hated, just hated what she would call, Bolsheviks. She hated Russians. She hated people who were adherents of the USSR in any way. And her comrade in that was played by my friend Rindis, Party Web Games, who was Alexei Sokolov, who was the Russian explosive expert from the Soviet the hero of Stalingrad. This guy was war hero, who was in their squadron, and their journey of coming to understand each other was fantastic. But it really did start with, Kat's character was basically just bigoted against Russians. She despised and was quite open about it, and snide and in all those ways, and then which made the fact that they became very, very close friends and I think there had that series gone on longer and what happened didn't happen, possibly romantic,
Mm.
with the kind of affection that they grew for each other, made all that so much more effective, and then so much more tragic when she still had to shoot him in the head in the final episode.
Ooh.
Uh,
Oh. Yeah, that's really good. That's really
Spoilers.
good.
Spoiler alert. Bit too
Spoilers.
late.
Yeah, you've all seen it by now, I hope, please, right? Right?
But then
But it
there
works,
was the,
yeah.
but then there was the bad example.
Yes, the bad example.
And that was
I should mention, by the way, Trooper, before we get through this, we have a tradition here on the show, which is that before you go, you have to make at least one plea to the GMs to the world of what not to do.
Oh, all
So
right.
if this might be it,
This is probably it.
okay.
I mean, there are many, but so this was a Wild West game, historical. So not supernatural, super historical, but without supernatural elements. And I was playing someone who was sort of loosely based on my great grandfather, who was well, maybe a little bit older, right? But like my great grandfather's grandfather had fought in the Black Cavalry during the Civil War. And because he fought in the Black Cavalry during the Civil War, they gave him land out in South Dakota. So my great grandfather's grandfather was a cowboy, and that land sort of carried through. And my great grandfather had that land and so forth, right? Was a cowboy, all that stuff. And so I was like, oh, so I know that this sort of thing existed, so I'm going to be this cowboy. And I wasn't being my great grandfather or my great 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 grandfather, but I was like, oh, somebody like my great grandfather, existed, so I'm going to be that person. And what ended up happening was, and this is a thing that I do not recommend. So there were racist people in the game, which was fine. I was fine with that, because that's okay.
Racist characters in the game,
Yeah, racist
not
characters
racist
in the game.
players. Okay.
One
Well,
hopes.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
but,
okay. All right.
yeah, and I can talk about some techniques as well. But the problem was that the GM, the players were all fine, but the GM structured things in such a way that I could not play my character.
How so?
Right? Everybody was like, first off, there was an attempted lynching on my character, so that was
Okay.
exciting. But also, nobody would interact with my character. NPCs, right? Because they were so racist, they wouldn't like trade with me. They wouldn't. I could not interact with the world, which I would say is historically inaccurate because people did exist and they did interact with the world, right? So like I was basically unable to actually function as a character in the game. And if I cannot function as a character in the game, you should let me know before I make the character. So if you're going to play a woman in I don't know, 1954, it should not be that you can't do anything at all, because first off, women did do things, right? But if the game master takes the existence of oppression as a means to make it so that the player cannot do anything, then that's not good. Like that's bad. The character still has to be able to function because they are one of the protagonists of the game.
It sounds like the GM made the fact that people had racial animus toward your character the only important thing about your character, essentially. Like that is the only thing that mattered in this world, really.
Which could have been fine. It could have been fine if I could still do things, right? Like if
Yeah,
I
if you
could
can still function in the world,
if I could still
right.
function, then I could have dealt with that as a player because then I could still do things. But like my ranch was burned down. There was an attempted lynching. Like it was a lot, and I was like, okay,
That sounds exhausting.
it was quite exhausting because I didn't have any agency as a player. And no matter what happens, players should have agency. Players can't do like characters can't do anything they want necessarily. I mean, you can do whatever you want. There's always consequences, but players should still have agency. So that was a very, very uncomfortable and not great experience, especially the table dynamics. Since I was the only black person at the table, it was a little rough.
Did you
And
get
that
through
was
that game, or just
you
stick it
know,
out,
it
or no?
I still it was a short shot, so I only had to sit through like 5 episodes of that, so that was fine. I mean, it was an experience that I still have thoughts about, of course, because it was,
Yeah, right.
but I have a lot of thoughts about it. But like that for me went from my character being harassed, which is fine, to me being harassed, which is not fine. So,
Oh,
right, like, because it was just like I couldn't do anything, right? Like, and so that's not good, right? So I would say, don't do that, right? Don't do that.
plea to the GMs of the world: do not do that. Let your players have
And
agency.
yeah, but also I think there's another thing I would say, because I think about this in the sense that I am often as a GM playing some gross people, and this is advice not just for historical games, although people often thinks it happens in historical games a lot more often, but also wherever. Um, be thoughtful about when you zoom in and when you zoom out of things. Zooming in versus zooming out is a very powerful tool that any GM has. What I mean by that is, um, I have had characters who like who are sexist and who will sexually harass other PCs. I've had NPCs who are anti-Semitic. They're big old Nazis and they're kind of gross. I've had all sorts of people who've got all sorts of things going on. And I think your job, in my opinion, you do whatever you want to do, right? Um, Same thing with torture. Like I've had torture, I've had domestic abuse, I've had all sorts of pretty heavy things in many of my games. And the art is when you zoom in and when you zoom out, right? So I find what tends to be very effective for me, there are a couple of things I like to do. One, I will start the scene in sort of like real time, and I will begin to and so you get a sense of the skeeviness of this person or whatever it is. And then depending on the vibe, I will just pull back. And then it depends on whether or not what kind of a conversation it is. But I'll just pull back and say, yeah, and then and then the supply sergeant, ogles and says a number of sexist things. Like I don't actually have to say them. You know what I mean? Like I don't actually have to say them. Like I can start
Fair.
with like
Yeah.
he looks at and he's like, oh, yeah, or a woman, right? Like that kind of a thing. Like that's pretty like benign. And then I can be like, zoom out, he's very dismissive, right? Like, and I can describe what is said without saying it, which is still quite effective, but it doesn't harass people. I can also do the same thing with torture or with abuse, where I lead up to the scene, right, where we know it's going to happen, and then I can zoom out on a macro level, and I can come in at the end of it. Coldrick says, Trooper, when you zoom in or zoom out, do you have pre-game time with the players to make certain they are chill, or session zero, which sets the ground rules? Most of this is session zero. I have people do lines and veils. I do lines, veils, and heads ups. So we do our lines and veils, like what will not be in the game at all, what will fade to black, and then I do what I call heads ups, where I will say in this campaign, before you agree to do it, I want you to know these things are going to be in this campaign, right? So this is
I'm gonna steal that. I'm
yeah,
definitely gonna steal that. Yeah.
like this is a World War II campaign, so I want you to know that this game will include discussion of genocide. There will be anti-Semitism. There will probably be torture, depending on what happens. Maybe you guys will never get caught, so it's fine. There will be violence. There'll probably be murder. Right. So like there'll be starvation, deprivation. Right. So I put up heads up of what is going to be in that game, so that if that's not the game for you, you can say, yeah, I don't want to be in a game like that. But I would also do that with other things as well, things that are not even yeah, just like I call that the buy-in. Like, but also it doesn't even have to be bad, right? So for example, I might, if I were running a really silly one shot that was really goofy, I would probably put that in the heads up to say, hey, heads up is that actually this is not meant to be serious at all.
Right.
And there's gonna be a lot of really broad humor because some people don't want to play that. You know what I mean? Just like a bit of a heads up of like what kind of things you can expect in this game.
The kind of tone
So
and
that,
tenor, if you.
yeah, like tone and tenor and what kinds of things. But of course, I'm always very careful about it because, as somebody says, with Volpes says, the best horror movies never have to show the evil. Um, and I think that this is like something that you learn when you're doing acting, when you do like actors training, is that sometimes the most effective things are the opposite of what you think, right? So, um, for example, in City of Light and Shadow, there's a character who's an NPC who's like 16-year-old boy who it turns out is being beaten by his father, who has just come back into his life, and his father is the chief of police and is not a good person. Also, Stark's not a good person. And the players found that the NPC doesn't show up for work, and anytime somebody does not show up to work when you're in the members' residence, it's a bit of a nervousness. They go to try to find him. They do find him, and he's in an alley, and he's curled up, and his head has been partially shaved, and he's got like a bloody nose and a split lip and a black eye. That's all I really had to say, right? And he was very upset. I didn't have to show you him being beaten, but I could show you this aftermath to sort of get the emotional core of afterwards. And there was this moment where the kid decided he was going to go kill his father, which was not a good idea because he was not trained in any of that kind of stuff, and his father was. So if the boy got to the father, it would have been very bad for the boy. And one of the players was like, I've got to catch this kid before he gets to his father, like to save him, right? And I knew that in that room was a scene of terrible domestic violence, right, was happening with the mom and this guy, and I knew that was happening. So I thought to myself, if they go into this room, what am I going to show them? What is the most effective thing that will be effective, emotionally useful, but it will not be me harassing players?
Yeah.
And I decided, well, of course, what will happen is that they will hear some sounds of violence, like, before they get to the room, they'll hear like something being pushed over, right? Like some kind of,
a vase breaking or something.
Yeah, like a vase breaking, a bump, or something like this, right? And the question is, what do they see when they walk into the room? And I was like, okay, the most effective thing to do when they walk into when the player walks into the room is not to show like the wife all beat and terrible and all of that. No. What to show is this room, the apartment, and everything in the apartment broken or ripped. Everything that the NPC boy and the mom owns being broken. And her sitting in the chair with no injuries, still and nervous, and him, the father, pristine. Nothing out of place. Every hair is in shape. His boots are completely shiny, and he is cool, right? Instead of going big and violent and angry,
gratuitous,
bring it into that coolness, and that is scary. You know what I mean?
Like, that's unsettling as fuck. Yeah,
it's almost the difference between a good thriller and a slasher film, because it's one that is literally playing with the psyche, playing with really what makes humans tick, and the other one is gratuitous, as you say. It's on the nose.
It's a little too obvious,
and I feel like that's, if you enjoy that, that's fine. But personally, I find what you described and the implications where you give people just a tiny little poke, and you let their brain do the rest, you let their imagination do the rest, so much more gratifying, because it means I think even a certain level of respect. You are sitting here with wonderful role players. You're sitting here with people who have a very active imagination, else they wouldn't be at your table. You are sitting here with people who take this seriously. Again, I hope so. And you can trust them. You should trust them as a GM to do that emotional work, and to
first of all, that they're smart enough, right? I mean, to connect those dots, and
able to follow you into that particular scene. And that does require a lot of trust. That is why we have session zeros.
And also X cards, and also check-ins. Like we have 3 different safety mechanisms for that game in place. We have 3 different in place at the same time, because I want both, not just lines and veils, but also proactive and reactive safety measures for real time.
X and O.
X and O, as well as red, yellow, green cards, like, so multiple safety mechanisms. And I use yellow cards as well, and I use yellow cards differently than I think a lot of people use them. A lot of people use them as, oh no, now I'm getting in trouble, so I want to stop it, right? Which they kind of use it basically as an X card, which I find can sometimes be a psychological barrier to people actually tossing it. So I tend to use it instead of, oh no, now we're in trouble, you did something wrong. I tend to use it as a, hey, where we're at right now is great. let's not escalate, right? So like you
Yeah.
can throw it just psychologically. It means like you can throw it when nothing's wrong, right? Nothing is wrong. You just don't want us to escalate. Like
Right. But
where
let
we're
us not
at
go
right now is
further. Yeah.
let us not go further. Where we're at right now is fine. So like if we're in a particular kind of intensity, like we're in a we're having a conflict and we're talking in this way, and you just yellow card it. I'm like, okay, so we just keep talking this way. We don't up the volume at all.
Yeah.
We just stay
Don't
where
go
we're at.
to 11. Stay at 10. We're fine.
We just stay at 10. And I find that just like psychologically a little bit easier to throw. And of course also check-ins afterwards and check-ins before, and checking with people, and also a lot of watching of people's behavior and how they're behaving at the table. But just generally speaking, in terms of especially when you're doing historical stuff, I think that it's there's a character that a lot of the players hate, who's like sexist and classist and all that. And I can just say things like, now that they know I can just say like, you can tell that he doesn't respect you. That's all I need to say. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
They
know who he is. Yeah.
It sometimes makes it better because they will tell you how he doesn't respect them, and that
They're filling in
tells
those details in
you
their mind,
so
right?
much
Yeah.
more about what is important to their character.
Yes.
That I
Yes.
absolutely adore giving that GMing opportunity or that GMing responsibility
that
to
baton.
the player, because you will learn so much more for the future. Can I ask you a question though? Because obviously you mentioned those campaigns that are a little bit harsher, were off stream. Are you making conscious decisions when it comes to playing characters like that to do it off stream? Are you generally okay or welcome with, or happy to welcome the more difficult topics into your games? Because I'm assuming obviously the implications, that there are people watching, that people will often conflate a person's character with the character they're playing. And especially when you have games with strangers, as we have on Encounter. We have the rule, for those that don't know, we try to have no sexual assault, no major topics of racism, ableism, transphobia, homophobia in our games, just because, while for historical settings in particular, it can be incredibly interesting and valuable to explore, we are casting games with very often strangers. And as much as we vet our GMs, as much as we use safety tools, you can never look into people's brains. You can never be 100% sure of whether they're going to be able to handle it. And that's basically a decision we've made, because it's we don't, honestly, even if you can create something incredibly wonderful, cult comes to mind when you skirt that line. The risk of damage to someone when it doesn't work is not a risk we want to take. It's not what we want to do to people. So for me personally, I would love to play a bad person, to put it very simply. And to explore that, I would love to have the topics of various isms in game, although I'm fully aware that I'm saying this from a position of relative privilege where I don't have to deal with these sort of things other than sexism every now and then in regular life. So yes, I can explore that in game, but I would not want that to be on a stream platform. For me personally, I would not want that to be, I know, yeah, I would not want to take that risk of having to monitor chat and to monitor what other people take away from this, and also to make sure that viewers aren't
it's as simple as
affected by it.
When you're off stream, you only have the people at the table who you have to consider. You don't have to consider the 30 people in chat as well as the people at the table, and that's easier to manage.
I may be looking at that as well from a tech and representative and moderator perspective. Obviously, you can have all the content warnings you want in chat, but you still worry for some people. Are you okay watching this? Should you be watching this?
That's not your responsibility, though. In the end,
I know.
You know what I mean? Like, because the truth of the matter is, if you really worry about people in the audience, you should not stream at all, because someone will always be bothered right? Like there's that. I mean, that is. I mean, even if you don't have any of it, right, it can still be.
I fully agree. Like,
distressing,
what
right?
I'm not saying this is something, but because it is something that would be on my mind,
Yeah.
even fully knowing
Yeah.
that it's not my responsibility, it's still something to worry about because
I
you
mean,
can't just
you
shut
still
off your
have
brain like that.
responsibilities, right?
Yeah,
Like you still have responsibilities,
yeah.
but you can't control other people's feelings, and it's
But
very tricky.
how are you basically handling this
Yes.
sort of approach?
Yeah.
Is my question.
So it's a couple of things altogether, right? And I think it's very. And before I answer, I'm going to just make one little point, which I think will be interesting. So I've been in two different Good Society games, most of which were very lighthearted. I GM'd one, and then I've been a player in one that had two different parts, which are very lighthearted. People tend to find it very uplifting. But when in both of those games, so all three, right? When we had a discussion offline in our session 0 about whether or not we wanted to have sexism, homophobia, etc., in it, because they're like dials, we all said yes. Now, it may not have seemed like it in terms of how we were playing, but it very much informed our characters, right? It informed our characters that um, the women could not necessarily inherit, right? It informed our characters these things. We didn't just run around having people being super gross, although some people, but so it felt very lighthearted, but it was important for our sense of how we were maneuvering about the world itself. But I don't think any of those Good Society games were distressing for either anybody in chat or anybody in the because it felt very, very light, but it was still, it informed the game. So like there's many different ways. Like you can actually have a very lighthearted game where the existence of systemic oppression informs your characters. In some ways that's what Inglorious Bastard does, right? Or even Django Unchained, or even something like a Serial Mom, right? The Kathleen Turner movie where she's the suburban housewife who murders people. Like so, like there's a ways in which it may not actually feel oppressive, but it can be still informative. But so when it comes to playing things, I think there are a number of different things to think about as a GM and also as a showrunner if you're streaming. And the first thing is I run completely differently if I don't know the players. Like if I do not know the players, we go G-rated. Like, I mean, we might go PG, you know what I mean? Maybe PG-13. But if I don't know the players, there are a bunch of things that just don't happen in games that I run if I don't know the players at all. If I've not seen them play before, if I don't know them, there are a bunch of things that just don't happen. And actually, I am a much I'm a bit more of a hands-on GM than some people might be used to in the 2020.
Hands-on in what sense?
I will say no. Everyone's like, GMs should always say yes.
Oh,
GMs
that's
never
not
say
true.
no. Well, people say it.
That
They're
is
like,
not a
oh,
tip I would give. No.
that is not a tip I
We've
would give
had
either.
that talk here as well. The yes
Yeah.
and versus no but. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I believe that if you value consent, then you should also be able to say no, and that does include GMs. So as a GM, especially if I don't know people, but even if I do, but actually no, that's different. I mean, actually, I give more leeway to players that I know, and by know, I don't even mean like I'm their best friend, right? But I've seen them working. Like Lydia, like it's not like Lydia and I have known each other for 10 years, but I have a lot of trust in Lydia. So Lydia can get away with a lot more in character creation than somebody I've never played with at all or don't know in any kind of a way. But
And she just looked positively giddy at that, so
well,
it
you
sounds
know
like
what I mean?
you've
I've already
launching
murdered him once.
Yeah. So like but I say no. I say no to character concepts all the time. Like if I do not know you and it is a group of strangers, there are a bunch of things that are just not going to happen in the game, including antagonistic PCs. Like if I don't know you, if I do not know you, I don't know how you handle bleed. I don't know what everybody's sort of space is. We can have lines and veils. We can have, but there are a lot of things people don't put in lines and veils. We can have X cards. We can have NO. We can have all sorts of things, but there are a lot of things that people don't tell you, and I don't know you well enough. And so I'm going to say no to, first off, there'll be no sexual assault. Of course not. That's just not going to happen. But there's probably not going to be hardly any isms at all. And I will veto any PC that seems to me that might be a problem, right? If people cannot handle bleed and your PC is an asshole, pardon my language, we're not gonna have that, right?
This is an R-rated stream. You're fine.
Oh, okay. Uh, but I
Ah,
also tend to make
duck.
sure that uh, the character the what's the word the setup, the premise is fairly tight. Like if I, especially if I don't know you all, the premise is going to be tight. You are all um, emergency technicians. Like you're all doctors, and you're all gonna make doctor characters of some sort. Like you can do whatever you want within there, but like I give a fairly tight frame because I'm not gonna have that one person who like hates everyone and doesn't want to work with anyone because their character is
The
also an
misanthrope.
amnesiac.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We're just not gonna have that because I don't know you. Like I don't know if you can play that well or whether or not you're just gonna be a jerk, right? So I constrain quite a lot in a game that's like a one shot or people I don't know to set up, and within the constraints you can do whatever you want, right, to set us all up for the most comfortable experience. So for people I don't know and for games that are especially one shots, whether we're online or off, it's there's a lot of stuff that's just off the table. It just won't be there. um, I won't have it because I don't know you all. But once I know people and I know how they handle bleed, I know that I can trust them, that they can trust me. I know that they can trust each other. Like once we sort of get that sense, then there's a lot more that I feel comfortable GMing for my comfort level. Um, and now, when it comes to being online, there are a couple of things I think about. So once, uh, if I'm not going to do it offline, I won't do it online. Boom, right?
Mm.
Are there things that I would do offline that I wouldn't do online?
Basically, the question is, I guess, is there anything for which the audience makes a difference? Because that's really, I mean, the only real difference, right? The presence of an audience. So,
Yeah,
is there any factor?
um, I think for a lot of people there are. For me, it's actually a little bit different. Um, I am not as audience focused as some people are in the sense that I'm not playing for the audience. What I'm trying to do is, and that might seem very, very not true considering the kind of things we do on our show. But those are kind of things I would also be doing offline. So it's just that my offline games are particularly theatrical. Um, so there are a lot of things that I don't do, and it's valuable for me to show an audience um, a kind of particular gaming experience that I often don't see, that I do offline, et cetera, et cetera. But what I do is I do a lot of meta framing once we break, right? So I will do a lot of interfacing with the audience um, in a meta space. And I was also thinking about something that Lydia said that I think is very important is that while if I can trust my audience, I can trust my players. I try to cultivate an audience that I can trust, but you never know. I've
Yeah,
seen other
you don't know what's out
channels.
there. Yeah.
You never know. Well, I mean, anybody can be out there, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I've seen other channels deal with some problems. And one of the big problems, of course, is sexism. That people tend to say things about female characters and then sometimes female players. Sometimes um, audience members have a hard time distinguishing between character and player. And sexism is a thing and it's real and it often impacts players who are women in ways that are bad. And I think no matter what you're doing, even if you're doing like a sunshine happy game, you still have to deal with that. And I've seen it so many times. And so I think about this a lot. And I think that it is my responsibility as a GM to do a couple of things to think about this. And one of the things that I have to do is, and sometimes one, don't encourage grossness. If people are being gross, don't encourage it.
Mm.
That's one thing. Don't play on it. You know what I mean? Like they're because sometimes people can get clout out of this. Like there are things people can do, right? But don't encourage it. Also, if it starts becoming a problem, which um, so I've seen people address this problem by having a blanket statement in at the top of the game saying, "Hey, remember, we're not our characters." I don't think that is. I mean, that's good to say, but I don't think that's uh, what you need to do because it's vague. I think that if it starts becoming a problem, it's something that I call blinders. So, and I'll do a video about it one of these days when I have time. People talk about bleed all the time, which is like when your emotions, you cannot distinguish between your emotions and your character's emotions.
Yeah.
Um, I would like to nuance that a little bit. in a different way.
It flows in both directions, which I always find to be the interesting part of it. But
Yeah, but see, for me, I actually think that it's totally fine for you to feel things if you understand you're feeling them vicariously and that they're actually not your
well,
feelings. Like
that's yeah. I mean, I guess I'd argue then that's not bleed. I mean,
some people have a very broad definition of bleed, right? Where they're like,
right,
oh, but bleed is like when your character is scared and you feel scared. And I was like, as long as you know, like when you go to movie theater
right.
and you
That
see a
I
horror film,
wouldn't.
like you're fine, right?
I
Like,
wouldn't call that bleed. No,
yeah,
I would say when your character is experiencing something that causes a very particular emotional reaction that perhaps they're. I mean, it's when to me it's bleed if when the game's over, when the session's over, and you're lying in bed at night and you are still feeling what they were feeling,
yes, yeah,
then you have a bleed problem at that point.
yeah,
Take it from me.
yeah.
I bleed like a Romanov. So, um,
And but there's another concept that I think is relevant here to this moment, and that's blinders. And so there are people who have no problem with emotional bleed. They're really good at it, dealing with that. But they have a problem with blinders. And for me, blinders is when you cannot distinguish between your character's point of view and your point of view,
mm,
which is not the same thing as feelings. So you might not
sure.
have the feelings, and you might not even think that you're your character. But if you think your character is always right, um,
Mm,
we have a
mm,
problem, right? And so I developed some exercises to sort of deal with blinders to help sort of make that separation um, between point of view, between character and player. And sometimes I see the chat and I was like, okay, chat, I feel like you might have some problems with blinders in that you might be you're some of the things I'm not liking it. So um, we did a blinders exercise with my cast, just checking in. And then I was like, okay, you know what, y'all can and then we talked about it actually on stream before the stream started. Um, and all of the blinders questions are all about highlighting the difference for yourself and the rest of the cast. And then when we talked about it on stream for the audience, between the character's point of view and the player's point of view. So little things like um, take your character, your PC. I'm sure you're thinking of your PC right now. Tell me something that they did that they thought was right that you did not think actually was right, that you disagreed with your character on. And then being able to articulate, oh yeah, my character thought that this was a really good thing and I actually thought it was a terrible mistake, helps you understand the difference between your point of view to get a different point of view, but like get out of your character's point of view, let the fellow players understand that there's a difference of point of view. And then if we're going to talk about it on the stream, let the viewers know that there is a point of view difference, that actually just because your character thinks this doesn't mean that you think it. Just because your character um, advocates this thing doesn't mean that you do. To sort of break that sort of tie between persona and character. And I think that very often, for me, the difference between streaming and on and offline is that if I'm offline, I just have to worry about my players. Right, that's all I have to worry about in terms of making sure that I help them with bleed and I help them with blinders. But if I'm streaming live, I also know that I have to deal with um, uh, sexism, bias in the audience, and that so I need to sometimes, and this is actually very interesting because there is a tendency, and I do this. It's like I have never streamed a session zero, never done it because I think of session zeros as being private and as being safe spaces where the players can
they're
talk about
yeah,
things.
they're quite sacred to me. I would
Right,
say.
they're very sacred,
Yeah.
and so I just don't stream them. Now, I've often seen audience members saying we really want to see a session zero. Sometimes it's because they would like to know how to run one, right? Sometimes it's because this is interesting to them, and I Ivashta is like you learned it at Bleed with Ren Fair, and I have a theater background, so I also learned it. Um, but I
You know what's wild is uh, Vashta's Cadence, who Cadence, if I'm right, your character I believe is at the Kenosha, the Bristol Ren Fair, right? If so, I was there. If it was 2019, um,
oh
so that's when I lived in Wisconsin. So I was there at that time. God, I
oh
wonder if I saw you die. Oh lordy.
oh
Hmm. And
interesting.
didn't meet Cadence again until. Well, I didn't. I didn't. I. It's possible we may have met at that Ren Fair. Who knows? But then we were on Cult together. But that's.
Hmm.
I have questions. I wonder if I saw your death. Huh.
Ooh.
Anyway, sorry.
So for me, it's about this. right, having to now make sure that so I still have never done a session zero. I am I'm toying with the idea at some point in time of doing a kind of a session zero streamed live that where the most private things still happen offline, but modeling a session zero for the audience might be very interesting because it will also help break the character, the persona player line that gets really blurry for your audience members sometimes, where they sort of like conflate the two, because you'll see the sausage of like, oh, I don't know what kind of accent I want to use here, or what are you thinking? And I think there's something valuable in a very Brechtian way, right? Getting backstage. We tend to think of backstage as sacred, but I think there's got to be a way to show some parts of that, and I do it in other ways to help break the audience of the habit of not being able to distinguish.
I do
So
I do my debriefs on stream. I don't know what you think about that, but at the
some I do, some I don't, right? Like
if
debriefs,
everyone's okay with it, I clear
Yeah,
it with
yeah.
the players first. But yeah, if they're okay with it, we
I
do it
tend
on
to do
stream.
debriefs off stream, especially, right? Debriefs I tend to do off stream, but for me, I think they're like doing certain, like we did the blinders episode off stream, and then I said, hey, we did 9 questions. Are there any questions you would like? I would like to ask you one on stream before we start, like, you know, before we start the game itself, for the audience. Is there one that you would feel most comfortable sharing? Everyone's like, okay, this one, right? And so just little ways of trying to build in, because I tend to have really good players who are really good that way, but building that into the audience where they can start making those separations, because once I get an audience that I can trust, then we can do more, right? But you always have to monitor that audience. You have to monitor it in the Discord. You have to make sure that you can, because audiences, especially from the ways in which things are taught to us through TV and film, tend to have the habit of conflating character and actor. And so the things that you can do to break that, and sometimes that's not even about your players, that's just about audience. And that is, for me, that's not even just about historical stuff. That's just about being really careful about how you are framing entrances and exits into the game, building in moments where you can go sort of backstage, even if it's like a backstage, so that backstage in quotation marks, so that that you can sort of cut off that habit. And here's the thing, sometimes you have to lecture at the audience. I'm sorry, and that seems like what, but sometimes you have to lecture at the audience and you have to let them know, right? Because I think that one of the things that I've experienced the most is that there are many people who don't understand women, and they don't understand what it's like to live under sexism, and how people behave. And so sometimes, and also we live in a misogynistic society, and so sometimes chats are very quick to hate women PCs, women NPCs, to subscribe bad motivations, to not give women PCs or NPCs the benefit of the doubt, to
For some reason, the very first thing that comes to my mind is the visceral reaction that there was to Skylar White from Breaking Bad. It was like the most
exactly.
hated character
Yeah.
on that show,
Mhm.
even though her husband is objectively terrible. For some
Yeah.
reason, for some reason, she's the one that got all the flack, and that's where my brain immediately went when he started talking about that.
Yes, and here's the thing: if that were an RPG, I can actually just address it as the GM,
Yeah.
right? And I would never make the player who's playing Skylar or the Marisha Ray effect, right? Yes, or Priscilla Quibble. Yes.
Is this another
Priscilla Quibble was a character I was playing who everyone assumed was like the most evil person ever, and what she was a woman in like 1809 who is not able to do anything, right? Like, and who therefore has to find a way to have a life where she can use her mind, and she has to keep that secret, which makes her seems a little suspicious. But right, and so for me, I would also never make my players who are women defend their characters that way necessarily. If they wanted to, they can. But as the GM, it's my responsibility to say, hey, audience, I'm just going to tell you a couple of things. Just so you know, women could not vote in France in 1942. And so when people are doing these things, this is the context. So sometimes there's that moment where I think that it's my responsibility. And it's a little bit easier with historical games, to be honest, because with historical games, you can just point to actual historical fact to sort of say why this is happening. It's a little bit harder sometimes with sci-fi or fantasy. But when the chat starts moving into that space that's sexism, which is what I see happening most often. Easily, right? People tend to move there easily, is to just take a little bit of a break at some point in time and have a discussion with your chat about why this person is not evil just because they're doing this thing, or why this makes sense within the context. And I think it's actually the responsibility of at least the GM allies to take a moment, if you start seeing this building in your chat, in your community, to have a discussion about it. And you don't have to like just nip it in the bud, just do it and be like, hey, just so you know, this is where this is coming from. This is where this is going. And sometimes the players don't want to do it, or they can't do it, or it's not effective if they do it. Sometimes people won't listen if they do it themselves. So sometimes you just have to do it. And historical games often give you ammunition to do that a little bit more effectively. Um, and I just think that becomes really important to make sure that if somebody's playing uh, certain types of characters, especially women, but not exclusively, but especially, that if you notice chat getting weird, that you nip it in the bud and have a discussion about it. I think that's really important. And and the thing is, that discussion can seem, if you build in meta moments into your game, right? And so like for my games, meta moments always happen in the beginning of the game, before we start, at break, and at the end. We have these meta moments. And if you have already a habit of having some meta moments in your stream, then you can just build that conversation into it, and so it doesn't feel super out
Doesn't
of.
doesn't feel like you're stopping all the proceedings.
Yes.
Essentially, it's just make it part of the
Yeah,
proceedings.
you
You
should
know.
make it part of the proceedings, but I think it's important to um, watch out for implicit bias in your audience if you're streaming it. I think that's really important,
Mm.
and it happens a lot. It happens a
Do you
lot.
think? I mean, I know you did say already that's not a problem isolated to historical settings in
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
RPGs. But do you think it particularly is a risk that's more likely to come up in when doing something in a historical setting?
No, I think,
Alas, no.
alas, no, alas, no. Um, but I will say that I did this as a player. Um, I did this as a player. I had to do an intervention as a player on one of my characters, and I did that in chat. So this was when I was playing A State of Affairs, a Good Society game, and and I was playing my character Cuthbert Ashby, is a particularly flamboyant, dandy, gay noble, and he is, this is like, it's like usually Good Society set in like a small kind of provincial town, and he is super dandyish, um, and very scandalous in his own way, and always in trouble. And there was a person in chat who kept saying these things. I saw it more than once, who said things like, well, oh, they're not being historically accurate because a person like this would be murdered. This is not like, so like none of their attitudes are historical. Like she's just kind of like wanting to inform us all that a person like Cuthbert, in if we were being historically accurate, would be murdered in real life. And um, the thing is, that's
Hmm.
not true, right? That's just not true. And that person was giving bad history into chat, and it wasn't true that what I was doing was just doing a completely ahistorical character. My character was modeled after historical people, was mostly modeled after Lord Byron,
Mm.
who
Was
was,
about to literally, I was waiting for you to
yeah,
take a breath. Have you ever heard of Byron? Have you ever heard of Wilde? I mean, they
Yeah, but
tried,
Wild is
but
what I thought of. Yeah,
yeah, no, it
my
was
brain went to Wild.
yeah, my character was like a mix of Oscar Wilde and Lord Byron. And
even
Byron,
Tennessee Williams. I
and
mean, just
yeah,
did
was
you
like,
see that? Oh, it was going around the other day with what was it? The whole an interaction. The bird.
Huh?
Was it JFK? Doesn't matter. Keep going. I don't want to put anything
yeah,
wrong out there, so I'm not going to
Say
say it. But
Oscar
I'm going to
Wilde.
look up.
Oscar Wilde bragged about it. I mean,
yeah, I
the
mean,
I have the kiss of Walt Whitman still upon my lips. Like,
yeah. And the thing is, I made that character specifically because I knew that character could exist in that time, and also not get into too much trouble because he was super wealthy and had a title, right?
yeah,
Like if he
well,
were poor, it would have been different, right? And that actually
fair.
became part of the interesting conflict. But so there was this person who was like, who kept making this comment about us deciding not to be historical, clearly, because we're all having sort of modern attitudes and this person would exist. And I was like, yeah, no, that's actually not true. And it's bothering me that you're saying this. And so I had to be like, hey, I'm in the middle of the game. I'm going to put myself in chat. Because people like this character did exist, actually, even further forward. And what was being put out was a critique, kind of, that was not a good critique, and it reinforced some things. So I was like, no, I'm going to take a little moment, and I am going to actually just do a little intervention here in chat. And I think that sometimes you have to do that. If it's fantasy or sci-fi, they won't say that. They won't say, oh, you're being historically inaccurate. They will say other things. But with historical games, you have to be prepared for somebody to come in and being like, well, but that's not historically accurate. And you having a response. And the response might be, actually it is, which I personally tend to find the best response. I like when I can do that. Love it. Or it could be, yeah, that's not what we're doing. So, you know what I mean? So being able to know that you might get people in chat who, might be that way and be prepared for it. Coldrake did ask, how did this work into Colas when Tango reacted so violently versus London's Contact, who was treating all the ladies with sneering contempt in the beginning? Was that conflict expected to come out? And this is another one of those moments where somebody might say, oh, but Tango's attitude is like sort of like enlightened feminist attitude is so ahistorical. And I was like, but it's not, though. Tango's mother was a suffragette, right? And also a working class woman who had much more strength of purpose, right? And so his attitudes were, I mean, there were people with those attitudes. There were men with those attitudes in the 1870s. You know what I mean? Like, so the idea that somebody might take offense to sexism who's a man in the 1940s is not necessarily ahistorical, depending on who the character is. And I think that, again, goes to that nuance that no, not everybody was sexist. No, not everybody was racist, right? And like being able to sort of build a world that has nuance is really important.
We did have some questions, but sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, because it is not a positive. It's not a good gaming experience if that's all you got, but it's also not even real. You know what I mean? Like, if that's your fantasy, if your fantasy is that everybody is like really awful, I would ask you to sort of think about that a little bit, is what I would say.
We did have a couple questions from early on in chat that we haven't gotten to. A while back, Kat asked, I'm going to do these in sort of the opposite order we received them. But, what is your favorite era or time period to explore in TTRPGs? Do you have a favorite?
I like many eras, but my favorite, I would say, is the 1920s. You know, like 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, to like 33, around there. The 20s, for a couple of reasons. One, it's far enough in the past that people had different attitudes that are interesting, right? So that there were people who had sexual identities that do not exist today, and that's really interesting to me. Like they had just different sexual identities than we have now, and they understood their sexuality and their gender differently, and that's really cool. But it was also a time when you have the Harlem Renaissance. Berlin was like super queer. That's very exciting. There are protest movements.
Have you seen that great Call of Cthulhu supplement, by by the way? Call of Cthulhu, the Berlin
Berlin?
supplement.
Oh yeah, I have it.
So hot.
Like right over,
back there.
Right over there.
God, so good.
Right over there. Yep.
Beautiful.
Berlin, the Wicked City.
Yeah, gorgeous.
The music is great. I enjoy the music of the time period. It's modern enough that there are a lot of things. It's modern enough that it's actually kind of easier to get into for the players, but it's also distant enough that certain kinds of technological things that can be a little bit difficult are still available. Players often have an interesting, have a sense of it, you know, even just because some films they've seen, so you don't have to do as much background in certain ways. But it's such a cool time period in terms of civil rights, class rights. Like, there's just a lot going on historically where you can do a lot. There's also a lot of intrigue that's happening. There are a lot of really interesting stories that you can tell in that moment. So like for me, it would be after the rise of jazz, but before the rise of fascism globally, right? So like there's that sort of particular kind of moment where
that
you
little
can
feel good, but the darkness is coming.
Yeah, but also a little grungy in its own way.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and there's a lot you can do there. Like, and
It's
also,
I mean, like any other boom period, the 20s. One thing I find appealing about the 20s, like any other boom period, it's a Gilded Age. It looks glitzy and glamorous. There is a
yeah,
dark, seedy underbelly
yeah,
to it.
that's right.
Absolutely, and it's and it's massive wealth inequality, and some people are living pretty grungy lives.
Yep.
In addition to people who are living in incredible excess, and
Yes.
I think
Yep.
that's what comes to mind with the 1920s. That's the first thing you think of. It's
Yep.
ironic because of Prohibition, but the first thing you think
Yep.
of is drinking and excess and parties
Yeah.
and having a damn good time, and that is certainly part of the story. But there's there's a hell of a lot more going on beneath the surface. I've always wanted to do a one of the coolest things. I grew up in New York, and
Mhm.
when I went to college, I went to college out west in the state at a school that was on the shores of Lake Ontario. So
Oh, interesting.
Lake Ontario was
Oh,
in the backyard.
Prohibition.
Yeah, you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah. I'm
Uh,
excited.
yeah, so that was Lake Ontario is actually too deep to it. I don't think it ever fully freezes over all the way across,
Mm.
but Lake Erie does.
Mm.
And I've always wanted to do some kind of historical setting, and I think I might do it with the Call of Cthulhu thing. That there was during Prohibition, that was how you got alcohol into the United States. The Great Lake froze over, and you took sled dogs from Canada to run caravans full of whiskey of rye over the Great Lakes. And the idea to me, just picturing a caravan of people mushing dogs over the Great Lakes, surrounded by, I mean, if you ever stood next to a Great Lake, it's indistinguishable from being next to the ocean. It's so goddamn massive. The first time I saw one with my own two eyes, I could not believe it was a lake.
I have
Yeah.
opinions on that
Oh,
that don't fit the topic.
Mm.
on Great
'Cause-
Lakes?
Fuck yeah. That's not a lake.
It's an inland sea. It's an inland sea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's-
tides. You don't call it a fucking
Yeah.
lake.
It's-
Again,
People surf it.
Austrian landlocked.
Yeah, you surf Lake
I'm-
Michigan. Yeah, it's
Ah.
but it's fresh water.
Yes.
So I think
Lake
that's
Huron was an experience because
because it's
anyway,
huge.
Continue.
But yeah, I mean, I love picturing this image of the 1920s mushing
Yeah.
sled dogs across the Great Lakes, surrounded, once you're in the middle of it, surrounded by utterly nothing on any
Yeah.
side, just nothing but ice, and the thought of, because this is why I think Call of Cthulhu, the thought of what
Yeah.
lies beneath in the
Yeah.
in the frigid depths, these giant things carved by glaciers.
But I
It's
also
so
like the
cool to
20s
explore.
is
And that's a
quite
20 story.
cosmopolitan.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But it's also quite cosmopolitan. So if you're doing the 20s, like Shanghai's amazing in the 1920s, super interesting. Accra, right, in Ghana is super interesting. Like there's this whole sort of cosmopolitan circuit that's trans-Pacific, transatlantic, where you could get amazing, really cool diversity in location. There's like, and also what I like about the 20s is it's quite unstable as a time period. So there's a lot of things that the players can do, right? Like I always find that when you're going to pick a setting, you want a setting that has cracks in it, so that your players can dive in somewhere. And so that's, the 20s are a fave of mine. I mean, I have on the plus side, finally, recordings from 1923 are now in the public domain.
Yeah.
People said, "Oh, but they came in the public domain a couple of years ago." I was like, "But they didn't. The compositions did, but Congress gave recordings a grace period so that they actually wouldn't come in. So like, oh, it'll be an extra
copyright
couple." So,
law is fun. Yeah.
oh yeah. So, but now I could actually use recording from 1923. So, so there's a lot you can do in terms of like adding music or art. Like they're kind of cool things that you can do.
Can I tell you mine, by the way? My favorite
atmosphere.
time period? To do?
Please.
It's my absolute. So Monster of the Week is my favorite RPG. Adore that fucking game so much. And my favorite time period to do, and I've used it in a couple different things, is the 1990s, the early 1990s, 91, 92, pre-cell phone,
Yep.
pre-internet being common, at
Yep.
least. I mean, it was a thing, but pre-internet being common. And particularly pre-cell phone is a very, very big part for me, because I love the idea when I'm dealing with people who are hunting monsters that they can't just call each other at any given time. And when they get separated, they're separated. and they can't always check in on each other and know who each other's are. That is huge. And also just the aesthetic. I love the X-Files, so like the 1990s aesthetic is just sexy to me. I'm absolutely here for that. And there's lots of fun. It's such a big transitional period. The 1920s, it's, I actually remember going to school, like the 1920s. I think of being in middle school and having teachers consistently tell us, like history teachers tell us all the time that, I'm in elementary school in the mid 90s. I went to, so I would have been in first grade in like 1996, and being told like, hey, you actually live in the best time to be alive since the 1920s. You live in this boom period of like the American economy and everything like that. And
I don't know how true that was, but
yeah, that's what they told us.
Yeah. It's always the best of times, right?
This like Pax Americana post post end of the Cold War and all of that, and isn't everything grand? And it's the same kind of thing. That it's okay, that's, some of those facts are historically true. Yeah, okay, the Cold War's over, whatever. But there is still plenty of seedy underbelly here, where the story's much more complicated, just as in the 1920s.
And I suppose I'd also say which is my favorite era also depends on what genre I'm running. Like for me, the reason why I like the 20s is I actually can do a lot of different things with the 20s. But if I'm going to do espionage, it's probably not going to be the 20s that I'm going to pick necessarily. I'll probably pick a couple different decades instead. If I'm going to pick action adventure, I'm probably going to pick a slightly different decade again. So like part of it has to do with what genre I'm doing. But
That's
the
fair,
20s opens up a lot of different genres. Lydia, what about you?
I'm one of these people that prefers or that likes a clear fantasy setting and then infuses that with historical aspects. So I haven't actually run a game purely in a particular real world historical setting.
Stille Nacht.
Except for Stille Nacht, and that was fun.
That one comes with a year, yeah.
And that was interesting, but that also comes with a almost want to say best before date. Like that is a one shot. It's designed to be one.
Yeah.
And there's such a difference between experiencing a historical setting in a one shot or even three shot and actually a campaign where you have so much more opportunity to really work with historical aspects. I have a couple of time periods that I would like to run a historical game in, but I'm also, compared to you two in particular, I am nowhere near as experienced in various settings in TTRPGs and systems. But again, from tour guide background, and obviously every now and then when I walk the dog, I'm like just brain running. That's a word now.
Yeah.
Just, the various like, oh, this would be fun, this would be fun, this would be fun, and 50 Wikipedia pages later, your brain's like, why are we
blue linking? Yeah.
How did we suddenly? Why am I now in 1790s Austria during the time of Enlightenment under Joseph II? Because that is one of the particular time periods I would love to do.
Yeah.
Joseph II is my homeboy. He was the eldest son of Maria Therese, who I want to be when I grow up, without the 16 pregnancies.
Also fair.
Skip that. But love Maria Therese. She was problematic in her own way, but overall, in the historical context, love her. Joseph II, even better. That's, oh god, I'm running off on another historical thing because that's what I do. Joseph II, Austria in particular, was a weird place during Enlightenment, because in most places in Europe you had the people overthrowing an absolutist monarchy or government in one way or another, and in Austria it was kind of the other way around. It was Joseph II becoming emperor only for 10 years, but in 1780, after growing up under Maria Therese, who was incredibly we would call her bossy these days, but you can be bossy when you're the fucking boss. So he grew up and he was this rebel teenage emperor in a way. He was embracing Enlightenment. He was the one who kind of started implementing all these Enlightened reforms, and he was the fucking emperor. And all of his advisors were like, hey, but that would be bad.
What year? You said 1780s?
1780, yeah.
Okay, so this is like pre Yeah, okay, yeah.
1780 in Austria till 1790. He only governed for 10 years. But yeah, he was the one who forced monastery schools to go public. He was building orphanages. He was introducing education more so than his mother, who is usually credited with it. He was the one abolishing torture. He introduced reusable coffins. Love him.
Oh. Recycle.
And it was the people who were like, well, this is not how we done it.
Yeah.
We don't like this new emperor. What's
It's
wrong?
not how
He's
we
not
done
oppressing
it.
us.
Yeah.
Come
He's
down
not
here and
oppressing
oppress
us
us.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much that. When what was it?
Was this like?
One of my favorite quotes. Oh, it's been so long. I've been so.
But was there like a strain of like
Scottish.
conservative monarchism in the people that were like, get back to the olden days?
Yeah,
that's pretty
exactly
much what
that.
yeah.
They undid most of his reforms when he died because,
Yeah.
But if I want, yeah, it was something about the brothels. Closing brothels or opening brothels. He was something. If I wanted a brothel, I just put a roof over all of Vienna. Something like that. I need to look that up again. It's been 10 years, but he also, and this is the particular setting that I would love to play it in. Call of Cthulhu comes to mind. The Narrenturm, the Tower of Fools. He opened the first mental asylums or hospital for mental health, but it was, a mental asylum.
Tower
and
of
it was that. It was a prison more than anything, but with weird experience of that time that were somewhere in between alchemy and some weird old magics. Like, he literally built that tower according to the moon phases, with various windows looking up to it was a wild, strange in between sort of thing, where you are looking towards progress in the new sciences and all the new revelations and philosophical ideas, but you also still are a person of your time, so all the old superstitions are incredibly present. And that strange conglomerate is something super fascinating that I quite like for again, my brand of TTRPG, which is always a little bit more steeped in fantasy or rooted in fantasy.
That actually was the next question I was going to ask, because it was the other one we got, which was I asked you the one that your favorite one to explore, and then one that you've not that you want to. And I'll just very quickly answer mine, because I want to hear yours in depth. 1848, just 1848. I would love to do anything set in 1848 Europe during like the springtime of the peoples. That would be so fucking cool. I don't know as far as because the other part of the question was asked is what system would you use? The temptation is to use a generic system, use a fate or a cipher, but I don't know. Could probably do something with Zweihander, for that might work. Using especially with some of the Dark Astral or Mango supplements, something like that. But I don't know. But I would love. I'm fascinated with Revolution. It's one of the historical topics I'm most enamored with.
Yeah.
So there's no. I mean, there's Revolution, and then there's 1848. I mean, it's all of Europe is on fire for a few months, and that would just be such an interesting. There's so many threads to pull. There's just so many story threads to pull in there. I would absolutely love to do that. So, what's yours? You mentioned, I did hear you say at the top that you hadn't done prehistory yet, so that's interesting. Is that the one you'd like to do most, or is there another one that you haven't done?
I want to hear Lydia's answer first. Yes.
All right, I do actually have an answer. Although system again difficult. When I was watching Cult, and again, this is me being rooted in fantasy. I was thinking Scotland, because again, this is where I live now. This is the tourism I'm doing. This is the history I'm dealing with at the moment. I was thinking Cult, going into into the time of Kenneth MacAlpin, into the time of old Pictish Scots and Gaelic kings, and again a time that is very sparsely documented, if at all. just because it kind of gives you a little bit more leeway with supernatural themes and with the idea of reborn gods or cult divinity lost, the divinity stripped away and regaining it. And I've always been incredibly fascinated by the wilderness and the unexplored territory that is almost, well, it feels like within Western Europe, within Central Western Europe, Scotland is one of the few places on a small scale where that is still visible and tangible almost. When you look at Rannochmore, when you look at the Highlands, when you look at the various isles, Western Isles in particular, that kind of, it gives you a sense of understanding for what that could be like. And that is humbling. That is that sensation of, oh, I'm kind of small right now. I'm feeling kind of, what would this be like 1,000 years back without Google Maps, without these roads, when almost everything kind of looks the same, but you're so far away from everything. It's still inhabitable, and that's the fun part. It's still inhabitable. It's still familiar, but at the same time, it's not. And I'm always fascinated by that in between. It's not so much revolutions. It's it's almost, it's that liminal space or that time period where nothing's really set in stone, where it could go either way. Those little hinge moments, that is something incredibly interesting, and that of course exists in all sorts of time periods or between time periods. But the ones I'm familiar with in this case is late Baroque Rococo turning into Enlightenment in Austria, and in my case now Scotland at that time. So that's some connections I've made. Plus, of course, druidic aspects, naturalist aspects that are still very present in today's Scottish culture, but of course, incredibly stylized because it has to be, because there's nothing else. That is fascinating. And I would also say that is of course informed by me being European and by me not having traveled to too many places, because I am absolutely aware that there's more wilderness in Canada, that there's more wilderness in other parts of the world, but I'm not familiar with it. And for something to GM, I would like it to be something to be familiar with.
So interesting. So I suppose, and I do want to say something about historical fantasy. I want to get back to that because you said something, and I wanted to say something that was interesting. But for me, I think, so I always think that when thinking about a setting, it's not just a historical time period, it's also a location and a framing, right? So like when I'm running something, okay. Back in the day, people would often run D&D like this. Hey, we're going to play a game of D&D. Make a first level character. And then people just do. And if there's any kind of coordination, it might just be to make sure that you have one of each of the 4 core classes. But that's it, right? And so then you're like, well, I'm like a chaotic, evil thief, assassin, who's from the desert. Oh, that's interesting. I'm a lawful good paladin from the mountain. Like, and all of a sudden, like, you get 4 people who have just no connection to each other, and they're supposed to, I don't know, go into dungeons and kill things together. Like, there's just no frame. And so I'm always thinking nowadays in terms of framing a campaign a bit more tightly, where, like, if I were to run a D&D campaign right now, I would not say make a D&D character. I would say, okay, how would you feel about a D&D campaign where you are all, let's say there's like maybe a forest community on the edge of that is still like there's a larger empire that's expanding outwards and sort of clear cutting lots of forests, and you're part of this forest community that is still extant. So would you be cool with that kind of a campaign idea? People say yes. I'm like, okay, so then make a character who is part of this forest community of some sort, who's sort of invested in sort of preserving it. And then people make characters that have some kind of connection. Anyway, so when I think about historical time periods that would be interesting to me, I'm also thinking about locations and what kind of things players would be doing. And I think 2 things I've not done that I think would be interesting would be the Haitian Revolution
Oh, yes, yes,
I
yes,
think that would
yes.
be really interesting because there's a lot of people like that's I mean that's sort of global in certain ways, so you can get characters from very different places.
It's
And I would
such a
it's like
fascinating event too, and how
oh
impactful it was. And we like
yes,
it's not discussed what a massive global impact the Haitian Revolution had. Oh, it's so good.
right? It would give me an excuse to do a lot of reading, so that's fun. Uh,
Yeah,
but it's a time of
Toussaint
really like
Louverture could be an NPC.
can be an NPC. And like there's a lot that you could do. The players be able to make really cool dynamic characters. Um, so that one, in terms of system, uh, Anna asked about also what kind of system. And for me, the system is always tied to what kind of experience I want because I've played of different systems and I really try to practice with lots of different. Like if I ran the Haitian Revolution with a D20 modern hack, that's not going to be the same feel as if I used I don't know, like a a good society hack. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
those would just be like very, very different feels, and some might be what I want, some what I don't, and whatever I pick is going to give me a different feeling. Uh, for that one, I've not run Savage Worlds, which is a game I need to run because it's one of the major.
I
Like
just
I
picked it
try to
up. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I have it. I have the new one. I kickstarted it because, like, for me, it's important for me as just like a historian and as a gamer to play or run. And I played Deadlands way back in the day, but that's different.
Mm.
Each of the major examples of like different games that are important in different trends. So, like,
Yeah.
I
So
have
the
played a
games that are
TTT.
commonly hacked, essentially. I mean, the ones that have a lot of that use like.
Sure. Or, but also things that are historically important, right?
Oh, okay.
So,
Well, yeah.
right. So, like, so for example, I have run and or bought read played some of at least a couple of the forge things that came out of the forge. I've played of course D&D. I've played a couple of different major generics from the 90s, like so like you know if there are things that are happening in trends, I want to make sure that I've played it or run it. And I haven't, in terms of the big major new generics, I've not run Genesis yet, but I feel like I need to. So there's certain things
Mm.
I guess kind of want to know
I
what the
saw
vibes are.
Genesis on your shelf, and I was going to ask about it. I see that behind you
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I have it
I
too,
haven't
and I
run it
haven't
yet,
run
but
it yet. Yeah.
it's like my thing,
The
right?
goddamn
But I
dice. It's the magic dice.
yeah,
I
yeah, and I'm like, okay, let me see what's going on there. But Savage Worlds might be interesting for a Haitian Revolution because I know that Savage Worlds is particularly cinematic, kind of big. So like that could be a thing that could be interesting in terms of like that might work well. So I might do that experiment of um you know, putting those together. That could be interesting. Um, on the other hand, I was just thinking what could be very interesting would be to do a Salem witch trials game.
Ooh.
That could be really
Ooh, hoo,
interesting.
hoo. That's good.
Now, that one, I would need a system that would allow for really intense RP that supports a lot of politics and discussion. Uh, I probably want it a little bit grounded. I probably want, if I'm going to have magic, I'd want a magic system that's very subtle. Um, I could see a couple of different options. I might go with, I might go with GURPS because it has a couple of magic systems that are very subtle that I could have fun with, and that would allow me at sort of like a lower power level, and that could be very interesting. But also because it is particularly granular, like GURPS is pretty granular,
Mm.
which means it has like a very wide skill list. It's got like
Yeah.
a couple hundred skills, but you don't need most of them because it's got like prehistoric skills and far future skills. But because it's particularly granular, I can have four PCs who all do the exact same thing and then have them be very, very different. Like I could have four villagers in Salem who are basically all villagers, but there's enough detail in the skill system that they could end up being very, very different people. So I might use GURPS for like a Salem witch trials one, and I might then use they have some very subtle magic that takes sort of time that you have to build up. So there are a couple like magic systems that might work well if I wanted to introduce actual magic. So I like, but
I like this twist though, the Salem witch trials, but there are real witches and magic going on. Turns
yeah,
out they were right. Damn.
it would be like super subtle though, right? And like,
Yeah.
and I would think I would really love to see So Volpa says I would like to see a Good Society Salem Witch Trials game, but I don't think I would want to see. I don't think I'd want to do it in Good Society, because Good Society is sort of set up. I mean, there are things that you could do with it. I think you could do Good Society in it. Um, like it could work. It would be a different game. Like I could run it in Good Society. It would be a different game because of the ways in which Good Society is revolved actually around reputation. Like there could be some interesting things going on there. But Good Society is very directed as a game. Like everybody has goals, and it sort of moves towards that. And I think that a system like GURPS would allow for a lot more variance in what the PCs are doing, what they want to do. And I think I would find, because I think I'd find that very interesting. So I tend to sort of think about what kind of oh, can Savage Worlds do ship combat well? I'd have to see
That I don't know.
I'd have to see. I'd have to see. Courier 3 says, run it in Old World of Darkness, but don't let the mage cast any spells until session 4. I feel like maybe, yeah. So like I would want something that would, like, for that one I'd want something gritty so we can do a really good courtroom drama, you know? And like some kind of subtle stuff. I think I'd like that, but I think I'd want something a little bit bigger for the Haitian Revolution in terms of like power level and cinematic style. So it kind of all depends on like what I'm wanting to do uh, with each one. Yeah, yeah, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. I. Uh, I can't believe that I was like trying to think what I could use for my 1848 idea and then didn't immediately say Flames of Freedom, because that sort of makes intuitive sense for that. But yeah, it would probably use Flames of Freedom. That would make a lot of sense for that. But
Pope World says that Savage Worlds can do vehicular combat with a little customization. Oh, that's good, right? Because that would be, sometimes I run things so it's like I feel like that might be a good system for it, and that'll be an excuse for me to run that system. Ta-da, right? And then I get my practice in the system because I feel like it's good. I wanted to say, Lydia, you said a thing about you like to bring historical stuff into your fantasy, which I have done. Well, no, I think I sometimes I bring fantasy into my history, but you know what's really interesting, and this is a weird thing. It's the opposite of the entire topic, and that is sometimes I like to tell people stop it when they start to try bringing history into their fantasy settings. What I mean by that is people get into these weird arguments, right? They're like, well, I don't know why we'd have like, I mean, if you had, this is the big one, right? Like, well, if you had magic though, that doesn't make any sense because it would ruin the whole farming thing, because then you'd have like too many, like this whole thing where they're doing this like analysis, right? Of like, what would the impact of like D&D magic would be in a medieval world, and it would like ruin the economy, and they go on this whole big thing. And I was like, but it's not set on Earth, right? Like we don't, like, maybe you actually need magic. You need priests blessing the crops just to get the levels of farming that we had, right? Because maybe the land is just not as fertile as the land on our planet, because it's not our planet. And so maybe actually, you really need people doing crop blessings just for subsistence farming, or maybe the chemistry that we have on our planet that allows you to have gunpowder doesn't work, or maybe it does work, but you know who likes gunpowder? Also flame elementals. So it's not a good idea to have any around, because they'll just hang over there and like explode things. Like the idea that if you're going to be in a fantasy world, sometimes you can actually just let go some of our laws of physics or some of our historical things and just allow yourself to do really different things, and like, so sometimes I like to just kind of let go history sometimes if I'm in a fantasy space, and like, but like for real though, like maybe it's a flat earth, I don't know, maybe it's a shell,
Discworld.
like just kind of like let yourself go some of those things.
What I'm doing for historical settings to bring it into fantasy is usually a bit more people based.
Yeah.
My home game, the Guards game the first thing I ran on ARP was, it's basically Edinburgh, right? I used the Old Town and New Town setting.
Oh, nice.
I used the general feel of 18th century Edinburgh roughly. But I used things like the Beggars Benison Club, which was a gentleman's club over in Anstruther, and they had fun traditions. It was wanking. A lot of it was wanking. Anyway, but basically I made a bard group that was modeled after the Beggars Benison. And while the people were like, oh, that's not right, back in the 18th century around St. Andrews University, I made them tieflings, so it was people like, ooh, bards, they corrupt our people, and we don't want them, and they're tieflings too, so fuck these horny folks. Or I made oh, actually, yeah, the brothels in town, the various prostitutes are actually real history prostitutes, because we have
And they all have good
uh,
teeth.
the state of the teeth is very important, according
very
to
important detail.
Ranger's
Yeah.
Ranger's Impartial Guide to Ladies of Pleasure in Edinburgh, which was an actual book that was published. So I took the names, and
hilarious.
I have
That's cool.
prostitutes, black prostitutes, because they had them back then as well, and that was made a note of in that book. Or yeah, Edinburgh University is the Wizarding College, and the guy that sells you the health potion is basically James Young Simpson. So it's all
That's
of that, because it makes world building incredibly easy. Characterization, same thing.
So like that was the thing that I touched on earlier to sort of yes and you, right? That one of the benefits of doing a historical campaign is that a lot of work is done for you. You have to look it up, but so for example, if I'm like, oh, one of the banes of my existence as a old school D&D GM is that I was not really a big dungeon crafter, like building the dungeons itself.
Never got out the graph paper and pencil.
Oh,
and did...
I would, but it was hard for me to conceptualize a dungeon that didn't have function, because I was like, well, but what is...
Yeah, why is it here?
Why does it look like this, right? So like I would have that was like that's my one weakness. So I would often like just reuse dungeons and just redo it for what I wanted. But when you're doing historical, I can just look things up, right? I was like, I was thinking, oh, I know they have these really small apartments, these garret apartments. How big were they? Like, what did they look like? And I went on YouTube, and people are like, here's my like 10-foot square garret apartment. And I was like, now I know what they look like. I can just actually get a map of like, you know, Louis XIV's castle or whatever, you know what I mean? Like palace, like I can Versailles. So some things, or use Google Satellite, go and like just show them where they are. There are all these really amazing resources that can make your life really, really easy. I did a campaign once where the players had to infiltrate the Kielstein House, which is the eagle's nest in Berchtesgaden, where Hitler had was like his hunting lodge, because there was like a lab, a secret lab there, and they had to infiltrate. And I was like, let me just go get photographs and also floor plans. Like Pinterest has everything. So there's a lot of ways in which you can like, some things are just really easy. Like some things are just so much easier. You can just like pull it pretty easily. And then also, again, timelines are really great, where I'm like, okay, so resources, if you can get access to them. Here you go, folks. Wrap up for you. Google Books. You can search for magazines on Google Books specifically, and they've got a number of magazines, historical stuff. I will often go to like historical New York Times, historical Time magazine. Just look up the month I'm in, find some kind of cool, interesting story, and then just pull that into a story. Right? Like I mean, there was things that we won't even find in history books, but there was like there was a Jewish women did a riot right around where we're at in the City of Light and Shadow, because the Office for Jewish Affairs cut the women in occupied Paris were getting money, like a stipend, like a support, because many of their husbands had just been put in concentration camps, so they did not have any income, and they were getting this amount of money, and they announced they were going to just cut it. And so these women went into the office and threw things over. They had a bit of a riot because they're like, we can't feed our children. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Boom, I'm just gonna take that, right? So there are ways in which you can,
line,
plot line. You can get plots.
Just add
super
water.
Interesting. Just add water and just figure out how your players are gonna mess it up, and that's the best part. And so there's a lot of cool things you can do that makes your life easier.
And honestly, I think that is a very nice little, despite all the very heavy and important topics we've had, for anyone who wants to start bringing a bit more history into their games, looking at historical settings, that I think is the core advice, and a very nice thing to end on. Just look at a couple of historical time periods, look at a couple of historical events that interest you, and see where the inspiration takes you. Run with that tangent, go down that rabbit hole, because there are so many ways you can implement something, from being various small characters to events that happen that you can lead your players into, even without introducing the historical settings, to just finding the humanity within the situation itself, completely absolved from the actual historical aspect to it. A lot of it is valuable to a game and to a game experience. And I'm going to stop you from responding to that, because I know if you do, we'll be here for another hour. I do have to walk that dog behind me, but this has been everything. At some point, whether will we find things to talk about with Trooper?
Probably not. I mean, unlikely.
We all have stuff to announce today. Now that Lydia told us that we can. Now we got the all clear from the powers that are Lydia.
Pope said it's okay, right? Pope, you're okay.
Pope said it's cool. We can all.
Is it okay, Pope?
Wait.
Pope, I talked to the powers that be, which are neither me nor Pope, so hey, it's fine.
Well, I trust you two. Like, I feel like if you two say it's fine, it's fine.
Good. That's how we know who is going to be on our side when the revolution happens.
And as guest of honor, you of course get to go first. So, give the people what they want.
Shall I give them what they want? What they really, really want?
What they really.
Yeah, give them what they want. What they really, really want.
Well, they want to. They really want to.
Really.
Zig a zig ah.
Zig a zig ah, yeah.
Please
GM a game entitled Zig a Zig Ah now.
But I wonder if you could do a Spice Girls RPG. It could. Anyway.
Spice Girls Good Society.
Oh well, I want to do a reality show Good Society. I want to do a society a hack for Good Society that's basically like the Jersey Shore, or like the Geordie Shore, Love Island. I've got it in my mind.
What are you doing Sunday evenings?
I'll be in Sunday evenings. I'll be playing in City of Cats, Southland.
Oh yeah, we know that one.
Oh. But what are you doing when that's over? Because that's not a long campaign.
8 episodes. And then once that's done, I'm gonna hop into a Blue Rose campaign. And then I think the semester will be over and I'll be moving it back up to Boston, and then I'll be resetting and doing new things.
Could you do nothing for a Sunday? Potentially? Just nothing? So that you could do something over here, because Sundays are when we do one-shots on this channel.
Oh.
Or...
Yeah.
We're going to do another day at some point.
Or not. I mean, yeah, we've done games on days that are not Sunday, but that's the traditional day. Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, I'm TrooperSJP. That's me. I'm TrooperSJP. You can find me on Twitch at TrooperSJP or Twitter at Academic Foxhole, which is my home. And I'm halfway through a tweet thread about Black British musicians. And I think I'm on song 6 right now. So I've got 4 more songs to add to my tweet thread. So if you want to go and read my tweet thread all about Black British musicians, I think I just finished with like hip house or drum and bass jungle. I did jungle, but I'm going to do like, I don't know, maybe Joan Armour Trading. And maybe anyway, that's what I have. My Twitter is weird. Just know it.
Though it's a highlight.
I don't know how to use Twitter properly, so that's what you get.
However you're using it, it's proper. I assure you.
And I stream, of course, video games on my channel, and I also play in and run RPGs. Where can you find me? Right now, we're in that kind of transition moment where like things have ended, now new things are starting. So I can tell you what's on the horizon for me. I will be running for starting next Saturday in a week. Yes, Saturday in a week.
Mm-hmm.
Today's Friday. Saturday in a week.
Friday. Yep.
Yes, I'll be running Cthulhu Confidential.
So Saturday the 16th. That's the one.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll be running Cthulhu Confidential on my channel. You can see my calendar. So it'll be me. That's a 1-player 1 GM RPG coming out of Pelgrane Press, and AJ, who works for Harebrained Schemes. He works on BattleTech. He will be reprising his role as Langston Wright, 1930s black detective in Washington, D.C., and we'll be doing another adventure with him. That'll be my January thing, and then in February, City of Light and Shadow will return on Fridays. I also will be. I had my goal to GM on some other channels this coming season.
Any in
and
particular?
No,
Uh,
maybe, perhaps, I might be GMing on a channel that's called Encounter Roleplay
for now.
For now.
for now. Uh, and I might be starting that up the week of February the 15th, which will be, it's like the 22nd, 23rd, I think is the date.
20th.
20th?
20th. I just made you your Discord earlier, so.
Oh, thanks. That's like Saturday, right? That's Saturday's the 20th?
Saturday the 20th. Yep.
There you go. I thought it was the 21st.
That would be Sunday.
Oh, no, it's not that. It's Saturday. So I'll be GMing Fate of Cthulhu over on Encounter Roleplay starting mid-February. And those are the things I'll be GMing right now for the short term. But you can also find me playing in, I've got to do this in order. On Tuesdays, you can find me playing a very short 4-shot of Dark Matter, Ghost of Saltmaw, over on Origami Shurikens. On Wednesday, starting next Wednesday, you can find me over on Praxagor Mophoria's channel, playing in The Witcher, where my character you'll find very interesting, perhaps. I already have the wig.
Nice.
I'm just going to say that perhaps my character lies. It sometimes happens. On Thursdays, normal. Fridays will be, again, normal. Saturdays is where that's City of Light and Shadow. Saturdays, Fridays early is Aether's Walkway over on Laugh Love Lindy. Evening, it's City of Light and Shadow. Saturdays is my regular gaming stream. Saturday evenings will be, hold on.
You
Fate
can
of
say
Fate
the
of
system as well.
Cthulhu. Yeah.
Fate of Cthulhu, yeah.
And then Sundays will be City of Cats, also starting next week. So Into the Southlands. So I think that's everything for the moment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good Lord.
Monday I'm off.
And Monday I have tea.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
Jesus Christ.
Lydia. So yeah, we were all kind of teasing audience. We all know the things that we're all doing on Encounter Roleplay next season now. So now we can talk
Yeah.
about them. So Trooper's got one. I did the Cthulhu thing last season, and now Trooper does, and this is a lovely reunion. Very happy for that. So
It's
glad
because you need time off so you can re-get your sanity, right?
Yeah, exactly. My sanity has to go up. It might take longer than a season after that one. But I am so very happy. It's in such capable hands. And Lydia, what are you doing?
That time when I said I'm not going to GM anything next season. I'm just going to relax. I'm not going to be in any streamed game.
I remember it intimately. Yes.
Yeah, and
And I also
I'm a
called you on
liar.
that one. Yeah.
I'm a filthy liar, as you told me I would be.
I knew you wouldn't stay away.
Because then I read The Great American Witch, a system based on the Great American Novel, which is a kind of mix of PBTA and Ten Candles. And
Tom said that was a crazy week.
Anyway.
Just sit in it.
I deserve it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna probably check this, and if I see anyone do it badly, I will be so mad at myself. So I'm like, fine, I'll do it. And I'm actually really, really looking forward to it. I'm not American, so that's gonna be the fun challenge here when it's the Great American Witch. But all the various the fact that I did this even 9 months ago. But
Learn to flip someone off like a Yankee, will you?
Hold on, let me get my gun.
Oh dear.
Yeah, there we go. So, various covens and various ways of witchcraft that you can learn, and they had the Kiliach in there, the hack, so I was very excited by that. We have one confirmed player, that's D, it's the Riddler. Most other seats will be open for public casting, as will, I don't know if you're doing a closed casting or open, probably a mix of it, but any casting calls will be posted on the Encounter Roleplay Discord, which is in chat. So if anyone is interested in either Trooper's Fate of Cthulhu or my Great American Witch, or of course Colin's game, spoiler, then do check that out. Do join that Discord and see what happens in the next few weeks as we're
Pope
preparing
and I
for
are
the
going
new
to talk
season.
about casting tomorrow.
Yes, you are going to do that, and whatever happens, we'll see. We'll see.
It's because eldritch things happens, non-Euclidean
Talks with Pope
angles.
tend to go that way. Yeah.
The robot happens.
Yes.
But this is someone gift this. I don't know what's happening. So I'm doing stuff. I'm doing some stuff.
Wait,
For
who
one
are you?
thing, what's that? What's that?
Who are you, and where can we find you?
Ah, yes. Well, right
Oh.
here. I just stay here all the time. And starting, yes, they are letting me run another game, Wise Ass Cat. And well, actually, so one thing. Here's one I'm not running. Starting, well, it won't be this Monday. This Monday we're recording it, but then the following Monday we're going to be airing the sort of session 0.5 of our new series right here on this channel. That is going to be Estate, the that we played as a one shot and loved so damn much that we decided to take it on as a full series. We've been talking directly with the people from Handiwork Games that make it. They're extremely nice, and they've been really cool in providing us some behind the scenes kind of stuff, because the second edition of Estate is coming out soon. It's not out yet, and they've been really chill about giving us some artwork and stuff. And even apparently, I was talking to Bulb, who'll be running that. They even helped him. They even worked with Bulb to design an NPC that'll be in our game. We are playing the pre-generated characters from the starter set, but we made them our own, and so of course now they have way more tragic backstories that we did to ourselves. Of course, yeah. No, my character Janice, he was just such a nice guy, so of course I had to give him a backstory that he was like a former drug addict. Like I had to give him something,
Happens.
Yeah. So we are looking forward to it. It's going to be a 4 to 6 episode short mini series, which means it's probably going to be 6 episodes if we're honest. But we're going to record some prequel material this Monday.
Cool.
We're going to record little vignettes that tie what happened in our one shot, tie it to the story that we're going to be telling over the course of the season. We're going to record that on Monday, then we're going to release it the following Monday. I'm going to put it straight up on YouTube, and I'm going to stream it here on Twitch so you can see all the stories of Jane, Jed, Janice, and Pendleton. That is going to feature Bulb Donaldson, who's going to be our GM, the man whom my captioner hates more than anyone in the world.
He's from Dundee.
He's from
so.
Dundee. He is from Dundee, Scotland, and my captioner hates him. But he is a fine GM, and he did a great job with the one shot, and I look forward to working with him again. That'll also have myself, Nymeria941, our dear Anna, Savvy Seaworth, and Wally Awesome King, also Wally132 on Twitter. And speaking of Wally, I too have a confirmed player for a show, and his name is Wally. For Encounter Roleplay this coming season, yes, they did give me a new show. I am going to be GMing Black Void Under Nebulous Skies, and Wally has already signed on for that. I asked for him by name, and I got him, bless him. And it's going to be the new campaign that was just kickstarted months ago. By Christopher Settleton, who I interviewed on Encounter Roleplay about it, and struck up a friendship with him. He's a super nice guy, and we've been chatting since. And he's given me it's just so damn cool when you're running this module and you can talk to the guy that wrote it and get advice on how to run it. He's been great, and I am very much looking forward to this. It's going to be a real heavy sci-fi is not quite the word for Black Void. It's so much more than sci-fi. It's more dark fantasy and space, I suppose, would be the right way to put it. But it's going to be great. We have Wally signed on. We're still waiting to see who else we get, but I'm so stoked. It's going to be a great story, a beautiful tale of exploration and loss and hope, and thematically it's going to be gorgeous. So I'm very, very excited about that, and that will start. That is also the week of the 15th. That would be Wednesday the 17th, 6 o'clock on Encounter Roleplay. You can see me there then.
Can I say a random thing?
You always can.
Please do.
Do you know what I think? Like, it tickles me in my mind. I just really want to do a cast announcement like the night before the show starts, when I know somebody's in the audience who's not actually in the show but say they are, and see if it freaks them out. Like the actor's nightmare thing. We're like, oh yeah, I'm in this show. It's really great. So and so's in it. So and so's in it. And like Cleric of Chords in it. And like I just feel like there's something kind of hilarious about like, wait, what? Surprise!
Did we just discover Trooper's evil streak, like a little bit?
A touch of sadism.
touch of it.
I mean, it is
know.
kind of funny.
It
though.
just tickles me. It's just
and see if they would show up too.
You know what? Though? If they did, I'd be ready for it. I'd be like,
oh hell
you're
yeah.
in. Like, yeah, that's all.
Please tell your tech to have the frame prepared.
Yes.
I should have just done
I
that
will
too.
murder you.
We got my Black Void's got
Lindy's
Wally
like-
and TP Grant already on board. It's gonna be great.
Wally's like, you could do that to me, Trooper, and I'd be like, oh well, guess I am now.
You asked for it. Hey, Dracu's here. Well, that is all we have time for tonight. But stick around, everybody, because we are going on a raid. We're going to go over to Wandering DM, where I just learned that Prax has apparently been playing the entire time and is somehow still finding time to talk to us. I don't know how you split your brain like that. That's impressive.
Multitasker.
Yeah. So we're going to hop on over there, but thank you all for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you to our guest, Trooper. You were a delight to talk to. Thank you so much. And
Remember, history's not scary.
History is not scary. Yeah, you know what? I will give you the last word, Trooper. What is your tag? What is your sign-off?
History's not scary. It can be a resource, and you can use it however you like, because there's no boss of you. You can use it a little, you can use it a lot, you can use it for inspiration and mess with it, or you could go really detailed, you could go alternate history, you can change things. Like, you can do whatever you want to do. Just you and your players have fun. That's really what it is.
That is a nice positive note to end on.
Zigga zig ah.
Zigga zig ah.
Zigga zig. Ah.
Ah.
Good night, everybody.